Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Fanfiction podcast. Today we will be continuing our journey of what if Deku was a great scientist. Before we start, please like, share and subscribe. CH23, When Villains Attack Part 1. The hand villain, who was called Tomura by the mist villain, scratched at his neck and chuckled in a raspy tone while saying, "So good to see all of you here in one place. That sure makes our job much easier." "What do you want?" Eraserhead demanded. "And who are you?" Blood Vlad also demanded. Tomura tilted his head and told them, "Us? We're the League of Villains, and we're here for All Might." This time it was Egon to speak as he walked up a bit to expose himself and informed him, "Hey Handyman, if you haven't noticed, we don't have a 7-foot-tall, blonde Japanese wannabe American otaku stomping around. Why'd you think he was here anyway?" According to our sources, All Might was supposed to be here today. The Mist Man, who was known as Kogri, answered politely. Egon rolled his eyes while waving the statement and exclaiming, "PSH, Bologna. If he was gonna be here, I would have been informed." "Actually," Nezu said in a small tone. Egon snapped his neck to him and asked in a serious tone, "Are you joking?" Nezu shook his head and Egon held him up by his collar and shaking him he yelled, "You low-grade back alley science experiment. Why didn't you tell me that All Might of all people was gonna be here today? Would you believe me if I said it slipped my mind?" Nezu answered as he was violently shook him as the other pros tried to stop the flaming scientist. Hey, why the anger? Are you scared that you didn't make this place pretty for his arrival?" Present MIC tried to jokingly wear off the current aura. "More like warning someone of it," Egon grumbles. "What?" Present MIC asked. "Nothing," Egon quickly says. "Hey," Tomura shouted. All heads turned back to the confused villains and Egon states while dropping, "Nezu, oh yeah, you're still here." After adjusting himself, he tells the villains, "Well listen, whatever your name is. Since All Might isn't here, that means you can leave, right? I mean, you went fishing for a whale and got guppies. What could you possibly gain from harming 3 pro heroes who aren't even that popular or liked?" "Hey," Present MIC shouted. "A bunch of snot-nosed teenagers who haven't even experienced sex." "Hey," one of the teens yelled. And a couple of no-name scientists. "Hey," Professor Genus yelled, only to get smacked upside the head by one of Professor Cephalopod's tentacles. "Shut up, he's trying to save us," he hissed at his companion in a low tone. "More than you think," Tomura stated boldly. "Explain," Egon offered, looking intrigued. "What's he doing?" one of the kids asked. "Buying time," Izuku whispered to them. "Even if we can't kill the symbol of peace, we can still stake our names on every person in Japan. And your deaths will do just that," Tomura stated with sinister intent. Egon put on a confused expression by this statement and dissected, "But none of us are relevant. If anything, you'll just be seen as a bunch of psychos and possible pedophiles. Killing the symbol of peace, now that is a way to send a message and have your name whispered with fear." "Us though, really?" he asked while looking around at them. Tomura scratched his neck in thought before saying, "Can't believe I'm saying this, but you might have a point." "Holy shit, it's working," Orpington whispered excitedly. "So, you'll leave?" Egon prompted Tomura, who then shook his head with a crook smile and said, "Nah," as the other villains started to close in with sinister smiles. Egon sighed at this and said, "Welp, I tried. Security. Active command override. Indicate all kill modes. 00001000 kill initiate." The villains stopped and looked around for whatever was supposed to happen, but when nothing did, Tomura chuckled dryly and said, "We've knocked out your security system before coming here. You're trapped." "Shoot," Egon said in a calm tone. Then the floor opened up all around the crowd, and Egon shouted, "Whoa, what the hell?" "Divide and conquer," was the last thing Egon heard the villains say before all down into darkness. CH24, When Villains Attack Part 2. Egon was grabbed by the sensation of falling, overtaking his body and senses, but the sensation quickly stopped as soon as it came when he landed on his butt a moment later. After shaking his head and rubbing it, he said to himself, "Well, that was unusual. Kind of felt like swimming in the air." The voice of Izuku chimed in. Egon whipped his head and exclaimed, "Izuku." Izuku smiled wide at seeing him, exclaiming, "Egon." The two embraced each other as Egon stated in a relieved voice, Oh, I'm so glad. You're all right. Ahem. We're here too, a voice said to the two of them, jumping to their feet and whirling themselves in the direction of the perceived danger. They relaxed when there wasn't any danger at all. Oh, Nezu-an, you, Egon stated while pointing to the principal and Bakugu. Egon then quickly looked around and asked, "Wait, where's the other three?" Everyone looks around as well, but no sign of Eraserhead, Blood Vlad, or present. MIC anywhere. The nerves settled in again as some of them assumed the worst, which was also confirmed by Nezu. They must still be back at the auditorium, he thought aloud. Where are we? Bakugu asked, looking around the room. Back in my office. Egon trailed off while finally realizing where they were. Then a thought shot through his head and he exclaimed, "Hold on. Where'd everyone else go?" Egon immediately ripped out his phone and dialed a group call. Putting it in the speaker he called, "Attention, tension. Roll call." Very quickly everyone picked up and answered back with a "here," to which Egon and Izuku sigh in relief. "Oh, thank the gods. Where is everyone?" Egon asks, trying to hide his fearful desperation. "I'm back in my wing with Professor Cephalopod," Genus replied. "I'm back in mine too," Holahok confirmed. "Mine too," said Henki. "Me too," Hatsum called. "Me three," Honey Lemon said in a shaken tone. "I'm here in my wing with Dr. Orpington," Cho told him. "We're safe as well. We got transported to the storage house with several students," the Morgana triplets told him in unison. "That nitwit villain sent us to our respective areas." Cluck laughed. "Which means we have an advantage," Otto exclaimed while slapping his tentacles. "At least we know that the students are all safe." Nezu sighs in relief. Egon nods, grateful that the kids were safe and accounted for. He then took a more serious time and said, "Okay, listen up everyone. We're in a dire time with the security against us and the doors locked down. I'm officially initiating all kill protocol. Defend yourself by whatever means necessary." "Yes, sir," everyone rode back. Sir," Cho inquired. "Yes, Cho," Egon replied. "As it turns out, the security system isn't down," she told him, making everyone listening raise their eyebrows in shock. "I think those clowns had tried to hack us. But it was around the time I was doing a diagnostic. We're still in control. Just have to wait," she explained, the smile on her face being felt through her words. Egon fist-pumped and exclaimed, "Sweet. But we're still locked in," she followed up. He deflated and asked, "Not sweet. How long before the diagnosis finishes?" After a few seconds of silence and typing from Cho, and she answered, affirmatively, 5 minutes. "Everyone, hold out for 5 minutes," Egon commands. "Yes, sir." They all answer back as he disconnects the line. Egon and Izuku then opened a hidden panel in the room. From there they both entered individual codes for scanning their eyes and fingerprints. Nezu and Bakugu looked on in confusion of what they were doing, wondering what else was hidden in the walls. "So what are we gonna do?" Bakugu asked calmly, more confused by the two scientists. "Try and get out or help the heroes," Izuku answered as he spoke through the voice recognizer. "How are we gonna do that?" Nezu prompted them. The two of them then took out keys from their sleeves, plugged them in, looked at one another and nodded. They both turned the keys at the same time, causing green lights to flash and something else to open up in the wall. Egon reached in and took out 2 objects that looked like collars, and Izuku took out a small rack holding several splinters. Egon put on his before putting Izuku's on as the teen hooked on several splinters all around the collars, making the mouse and blonde teen look at one another in confusion. Even Nezu shrugged when Bakugu asked with his expression. "Once secured," Egon answers, "something that was also put in your waiver. Creature division." Just before the teens could buckle down for help to arrive, a black portal opened. Out came several dozen villains into the science wing and began to surround the young heroes and the 2 scientists, all of them smiling sinisterly like hungry lions cornering an injured gazelle. "Nowhere to run now, little heroes," one of the villains vexed. "Otto, what do we do? We're trapped and have no way of defending ourselves." Genus panicked. "I have an idea. Just let me cook," Otto whispered to him with a wink before putting on the theatrics, exclaiming like an old movie star, "Oh, you're right, Mr. Villain. We're so trapped and weak and at your mercy. But can you at least let an old octopus have one last request?" The villain chuffed and asked back, "What is it?" "How is that octopus talking?" Another villain pointed out. Can I dry my eyes and blow my nose one last time? Otto asked, putting waterworks and blinking his big eyes. If that's all, then sure, go right ahead. The villain agreed as Otto reached out for a box of tissues. Then the villain put a thinking face on and realized aloud. Wait a second. Octopuses don't have noses. Suddenly the villain was hit in the face hard by a tentacle. The blow was so hard and decisive that the villain was sent flying back to the wall where they passed out. And neither do you, sucker, Otto exclaimed as he retracted his extended limb. How'd he do that? One of the other villains asked in awe. Like this, Otto exclaimed while punching him in the face and found the same thing as the first one. But then more tentacles began to grow from his body and started to sock the villains with a flurry of blows. The villains began to grow panicked and some tried to run away in the chaos. However, one villain stood firm and reignited their dispositions as they exclaimed, "Calm down, you guys. It's just one fish with a bunch of legs. It's not like his gigantic or something." The villain trailed off as he watched the small octopus transform into a literal behemoth. "You were saying?" Otto asked him before he let out a roar and started to grab up villains and crush them in his powerful grip. Unbeknownst to any of them, the professor had 4 splinters wrapped around one tentacle behind himself. A splinter that allows for the stretching of limbs, a splinter that allows for the growth of additional limbs, a splinter that gives gigantification, and a splinter that gives a form of hyper-regeneration. As the huge octopus monster took on the villains with seeming ease, the young heroes looked on in the mix of shock, awe, and horror. Could he always do that? One of them asked the other professor, to which he casually shook his head and answered, "No. Plant division. End of the line, green thumbs," a villain exclaimed in a devilish tone as they cornered the kids and female scientist like hungry lions cornering a gazelle. Hollyhock glared at them and stated, "That's what I should be saying to you all." She then thrusted hands and every plant in the greenhouses started to move before quickly attacking all of them. Vines grabbed and strangled, buds and pods spat spores, poison needles, and goop, plants that had teeth and began to snap them up, plants that hypnotized, and plants that shot elements and explosions. The villains screamed in shock and fright as Hollyhock concentrated on keeping them back. "What the hell? The plants are alive," one villain screamed before getting caught in vines and being shoved into the toothy maw of a carnivorous plant. Sound division. Ungoliant. Ungoliant. Where are you? Hanky exclaimed as he practically his office inside out with a place procession only for him to instantly relax as he stated, while hunched over in a corner, "Oh, there you are. I was so worried." "Who's Ungoliant? You sister, girlfriend, daughter?" a student asked as the man turned around with cupped hands to happily and proudly reveal a spider no bigger than the head of a pin, to which the students freaked out and tried to swat at it, while yelling, "Ah, spider." Before the students could swat at the tiny thing, one Hankoya's head tubs whipped out and bit him on the nose. Hanky turned away, protecting the spider, and exclaimed, "Don't hurt her. She's just a jumping spider. She's harmless to humans and helps keep me sane," he said, the last bit with a slight unhinged expression. Another student, who saw this, trailed off uncomfortably. "You stay in your terrarium where it's safe. I love you," he told the little spider, while placing it inside an environment that was far too big for it while giving her a little kiss before closing it. He then turned back to the kids and stated seriously, "Okay kids, now stay behind me. No matter what happens, you need to stay safe." And dash dot. Before he could finish, one of the doors was busted in and dozens of villains poured in while one of them said, "Trapped like rats." Hanky stood in front of the teens, arms spread to protect them. He then stood before them with his chest out and declared, "Okay, listen up, you villains. You can turn tail and leave or stay and suffer." All the villains began to laugh at his declaration, and one of them asked vexingly, "Huh, and what are you gonna do?" Hanky sighs as he closes his eyes and reaches into his pocket, taking out a splinter as he says, "I don't like using my quirk since it reminds me of my past. But you freaks have left me with no choice." One of his head tubes, the one that looked like a tail, curled over to his head where it split open at the tip onto something that looked like a microphone from the early 1920s. He breathed deep as his other head tubes moved to the top of his head and opened their mouths. Hanky then produced a high A note with such hypersonic power behind it that not only did it send the villains away in a shock wave, it also caused their ears and organ to burst while their skin was pulled off their bodies, leaving them bloody messes along the wall. Hanky gasped and coughed hard, falling to his knees as the teens, now releasing their ears, surrounded him in worry. "I didn't know your quirk could do that," one of them said. "It can't," Hanky told them while wiping his mouth. "Robotics and machine division." "Any last words, String Bean?" a female villain asked rhetorically as she and a bunch of other villains cornered Hatsum and several students. The pink-haired man fixed his goggles and stated with a smile, Yes actually. Could you hold off your attack for another 30 seconds?" The female villain raised an eyebrow and asked back, 30 seconds? What's happening in 30 seconds? "Oh, just the update I've done on the robots," Hatsum told her with a knowing wiggle of his finger. "Robots?" she questions, wondering what he was talking about. Then a loud ding noise sounded off in the room they were in, like that of a toaster, and Hatsum excitedly shook his hands while exclaiming, "Oh, they are done. Wait right there." He then ran off and pressed a button on a wall near a strange door. It opened up to reveal darkness, and within red eyes glowed one but one. Within a few seconds a horde of robots came out in 2 single-file lines with arms raised out in a threatening display. "What the hell?" the female villain shouted as they all came filing out like a tidal wave. "Robots. Commence Operation Swarm. Go, go, go," Hatsum commanded. The robots turned their unmoving cold emotionlessly and began to march towards the intruders with murderous intent. Very quickly the villains found themselves with the shoe on the other end of the foot. "Crap, there's so many," one villain shouted before getting swarmed and torn limb from limb. The female villain was doing better as she manages to take down robots by the handful. Realizing something, she exclaimed, "But they are so weak. We can take M." Hatsum sighs at her comment and stated back while rocking on his heels, "You know I wasn't gonna bring it out yet, since it was only 50% completed. But since you think you can take out my army, I guess I'll just do it anyway. It needs a field. Run." He then ran through the same doorway the robots came flooding out of, and a large garage door next to it quickly opened up to reveal Hatsum standing much taller and making a lot of unnatural sounds. When he came out, he was sitting inside of a giant clunky suit that looked like something from Mad Max. As the hulking behemoth of iron stepped out, the villains lost their edge. "He has a MEK," one of them yelled as a giant fist of iron came down on them. "Chemical division. Go away. 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 Go away," Honey Lemon screamed as she blasted the onslaught of villains with a giant ray gun machine that shot out a stream of green acidic liquid, leaving a trail of death and screaming as villains began to melt to nothing. "Defense and Armaments Division. We need backup. Call the boss," a villain screamed as they ducked for cover, with another villain that was trying to fiddle with a radio. I'm trying," the other villain yelled back in a panic, just before his head was blown off his shoulders. The first villain screamed but stated himself and grabbed the radio as more gunshots were heard overhead and the sounds of people falling dead. After fiddling with it for a bit, he finally got a connection as he watched a brave soul attempt to run headlong into the fray, only to be gunned down a few seconds later. "Boss, are you there? Say something," the villain yelled through the speaker. "What is it?" Tomura's scraggly voice answered on the other end. "We need help," he begged. Sounding annoyed, he shot back, "It's just one-eyed woman and some brats. They can't be that hard." Shaking his head, he explained, "It's not the kids, it's her. She's dropping us left and right. You said this would be easy. She's quirkless. How are you having trouble?" Tomura yelled loud enough for all to hear. But the villain's head was blown off right at the time when Cho yelled the answer. "I have a shotgun. And I have an egg cannon. Say goodbye to your necks." Cluck laughed as she used her machine to hold and fire her invention. The two of them work in tandem to quickly shift the tide of battle in their favor, with all the villains cowering at a single woman and chicken armed with nothing but firearms. "Storehouse. What the hell is this shit made of? Open up this force field right now," a villain demanded as they pounded on a force field made by the Morgana triplets. "And let you in?" Morgan asked rhetorically. "Fat chance," Millicent scoffed. "How about this instead?" Megan offered as a piece of the force field broke apart and slammed into the villain in the form of a tendril of darkness, sending him slamming to the wall and knocking him unconscious. Another villain growled and proclaimed, You can't hold this wall forever. You'll drop it or we'll break it. We don't have to hold it forever, Mogan started. Just have to buy time, Megan continues. Then you see the surprise we have. Millicent finishes with a wry smile. Auditorium. Tomura nearly broke the radio he was holding in his hands, resisting the urge to use all 5 of his fingers. He was trying to get in contact with his last few groups. After the last one went dead, only for his irrigation to grow as he got almost nothing back. Throwing the device on the ground as a battle raged on behind him, he yelled, "What the fuck is going on? Is everything all right, young master?" Corgri asked him. "I have no fucking idea. I can't get in contact with any of our teams, and the ones I can are either static or just screaming. How in the hell are we getting creamed?" Tomura asked after realizing what happened to the others. Corgri pats his shoulder comfortingly and tells him, "Not to worry. Even if we lose all of our help, we only need Nomu, and the heroes won't last much longer." As he says this, they both look out into the large room where the 3 heroes were, fighting against the hulking Nomu and not doing so well against it. Things were looking good for the scientist, but not for much longer. CH25, When Villains Attack Part 3. Just before Izuku, Egon, Nezu, and Bakugu could leave, a black portal opened in front of the door and several villains came spilling out all at once. As they all backed away, one of them strutted up to them with an evil smile while looking dead at Nezu. Well, the principal of UA, ready to die like what you did to my whole life," he yelled while turning his hands into metal-spiked maces. The others looked at Nezu, wondering what he was talking about, but Egon took this a different way and stated, "Hey, we're here too." "Oh yes, how could I forget about the 2 brats and the nerd?" the villain vexed. With a smile, Egon and Izuku scowled at this and they both shouted, "I'll show you who's a nerd." Egon then shot lasers from his eyes and blasted the one in front. Izuku then ripped off Egon's desk, which was booted to the floor, and threw it at the rest, pinning them under the large metal object. They, alongside the Gobstruck heroes, ran out the unoccupied door with ease. Once they were out, Izuku broke the mechanics on the other end and Egon welded it shut with his laser vision. The 2 of them wipe their brows and sigh, "I'm relieved once their job is done." This left the 2 heroes in shock and confusion about what they saw. They stared for so long that the 2 scientists noticed and asked why they were staring. "I thought you had a crystal quirk," Nezu stated. "I thought you were quirkless," Bakugu exclaimed. "You're right on both accounts," Izuku confirmed. "Then how'd you do that?" Nezu asked, baffled. Izuku looked at Egon, who nodded and then told them, "Well, since you signed the waiver, we can tell you. They are called splinters and they hold an energy source that can mimic and replicate anything they come in contact with, including quirks." Curious and struck by an overwhelming sense of intrigue, Nezu inquired, "How'd you figure that out?" Izuku put a finger to his lips and answered, "Trade secret. Less talk and more running. That door won't hold them forever," Egon told them, as he waved down a hallway. As the 4 of them ran down the hallway, hoping no more villains were out patrolling, Nezu asked, "So what's the plan from here?" "Get to the security office, try to force the doors open, or call for help," Egon told him. "And if that doesn't work," Nezu shit back, "we pull out all the stops including the dragon," Egon explains as Izuku nods. The 2 heroes stop in their tracks, causing the 2 scientists to come to a skidding halt as they look back and see the 2 surprised heroes say in unison, "You have a dragon." It only took them several seconds of running before they got to the corner where the security office was, and unfortunately, it was guarded by 2 villains. Luckily, this wasn't a problem, especially as Bakugu wanted to go out and attack them, though didn't get the chance as the 2 scientists casually walked out in front of them with zero hesitation. When the 2 villains saw them and tried to attack the seemingly harmless scientists, they were meant for the biggest shock of their lives. Egon breathed out a torrent of cold air that froze the first villain solid while the second one was caught up in some sort of space-time pocket and turned into some abstract artwork, unable to move and freaking out. The 2 scientists patted themselves off as they gave the thumbs up to the 2 heroes, who just looked on in a mixture of impressed, shocked, and furious on Bakugu's end. Once inside, Egon went to the nearest keyboard and started typing faster than the human eye could keep up. It only took a minute before results started the show as the scientist slammed on the keyboard wall cursing. Shit, he hissed. I assume those are good curses. Nezu asked hopefully. Egon gruffed and told him, You and I wish. The security system may still be in our control, but they have us trapped in with communications down. So what now? Izuku asked. We fight stupid nerds. Bakugo countered while punching his fist. Egon raised an eyebrow and shot back with sass. Oh really? Two scientists with no fighting experience, a smart mouse, and an uncontrollable hero in training up. Against I don't know how many villains, their two mystery leaders, and that giant monster. Yeah, we'll win. Bakugo growled, then looked at Izuku's neck and reaching out for one of the splinters demanded, Then give me one of those spitter things. No. Izuku rejected and pulled away, much to Bakugo's surprise. First off, they are called splinters, second they are our property, third, they are hard to make. And finally I don't trust you. Izuku firmly told him off. Bakugo was hit into another stunned silence for the second time by Izuku and just like the last one he had no idea how to react to it. So he just stood there stuff with his mouth open. While this went down, Nezu turned his eyes to the security monitor and stated, I see they even took out the cameras. I hope your staff is doing okay. This statement sent a shiver up the professor's spine as he realized he hadn't checked in on them and whipped out his phone to do a group call. Once on speaker, he announced, Attention, tension. Is everyone okay? Not really. Otto is on his last leg, arm. Genus told him with a nervous tone. I'm running out of plants to fight, Holahawk shouted. I'm losing my voice, Hanky squeaked out. I'm out of robots and my MEK has shut down, Hatsum stated with a displeased, neutral tone. I'm all out of juice, Honey Lemon screamed. I'm out of ammo, but I won't stop fighting, Cho exclaimed before she started to shout a war cry and run. Our force field is almost done for, the triplets told him with feverish fear. As Egon and Izuku heard this, all hope seemed to vanish. The sound of fighting and their workers struggling to hold on sent chills down their backs. They couldn't do anything at this point. It was hopeless. They were trapped in their facility with no contact and overrun by criminals with a monster that could do who knows what. On top of that, they had a bunch of kids to try and protect. What could they do? In the moment of conflict, emotions, and thoughts, all Izuku could do was fall to his knees and cry. Egon wasn't much better as his knees locked together and he covered his mouth in shock and tears flowed like two rivers down his face. Was this the end? CH-26, When Villains Attack Part 4. Nezu took action right away as he punched into the PA system and announced, Attention all students of UA. This is your principal speaking. I am officially giving all of you the freedom to use your quirks. Use them to protect yourselves. And the brave men and women trying their best to protect you. Show them what real heroes are made of. Egon and Izuku looked up at the small creature on the stool and held the mic like he was their savior. He smiled down at the two of them and Egon sawed to him. Nezu, thank you. It's what heroes do, Nezu told him. As Egon helped Izuku to his feet, he apologetically told the little creature, And I'm sorry for being so angry with you. Nezu looked off to the side at first as he confirmed for him, You did have the right in several situations. But please, dry your eyes. Your people need you, he exclaimed. Egon wipes his face and says, You're right. Now we need a plan of action. I've got one, Izuku tells them after drying off his face. Bakugo snickered at this and said, What? Are you gonna cry at the villains so hard they drown in your tears? This earned him a smack on the back of the head by Egon, who immediately after apologized to Nezu. Sorry Nezu, I should have asked you first. No, if you didn't, then I would've, Nezu assured him with a wave of his paw. Is the peanut gallery done talking? Izuku asked with his hands on his hips. When everyone went silent to stare at his statement, he said, Yes? As I was saying, Principal Nezu, how good are you with machines? Better than you'd expect, he answered with a chuckle. Then you stay here and try to hack the communications. We have to get in contact with the outside world, he told him while taking out a splinter off his collar and handing it over to him. Take this splinter. It holds a force field quirk. Keep a hand or paw at all times. It has a mental activation. Once it's up, it won't go down unless you say so, he explained as Nezu nodded. Bakugo. Izuku turned to the blonde teen who stood there in shock at being called by that name. You're our Venga. Anyone who gets in our way, you do what? You do best, Izuku told him as he grunted and looked away. Egon, we need to get to the creature division and then the chemical division. Once we have Gammoth and Honey Lemon we can bust out of here, he told the man who nodded back with fists clenched and expression ready to go. Izuku then looked to the exit door, struck a pose while pointing, and exclaimed, "Let's go stop some villains." Creature division. After getting past the initial shock of seeing a real-life kraken, it was much easier to take him down than expected. Having many arms didn't mean he was tougher, just could grab more. And they were very soft and squishy. In addition, being bigger just made him a bigger target, and soon he was out of limbs, leaving him a stump. And black and blue, and I don't mean from his natural color changing. With no more fight left in him, Otto shrunk back down and backed off with what was left of his limbs. Looks like the octopus has run out of limbs, one of the villains croaked as they pushed away a giant tentacle. Otto, who only had one limb left, tried to shake a splinter but nothing happened. In his head, he commented, "Crap, the hyper-regeneration quirk splinter isn't working. I knew it was unfinished. Now all that's left is GAH. One of the villains yelled as they were blasted in the face by blood. All eyes turned to Enema, who had turned his head into a thorny dragon. He sighs and states, "Welp, that's all I've got." When the same villain got back up, he was nailed in the face again, this time by ink. All eyes turned to Otto as he added, "Same here." As the first villain, who got money shot twice, wiped their face off with a furious glare, the other remaining villains followed behind as they surrounded the octopus and the scientist. The two of them backed away until they were cornered and held one another in their arms. "Goodbye, Otto. It was an honor to work with you," Genus told his partner. "My only regret is not dying after having sex once," proclaimed Cephalopod. "What?" Genus said, forgetting their situation for a moment. As the villains closed in on the two scientists, the one that got money shot twice was hit in the face yet again, but this time by a laser beam and knocked them out. When the other villains looked over, they saw Amr standing with his naval laser glittering. "You keep away from those kind scientists," he demanded flamboyantly. One of the other villains lost his surprise and proclaimed, "What? Do you kids think you have a chance against all of us? Don't make me laugh." Then it was Awais who told them, "We may be kids, but we're also heroes. And heroes always stand up against those who would try to harm the peace and the innocent." Plant division. Once all the plants had something to grab, munch on, or ran out of ammo, it was all a matter of pushing past or cutting them down. Hollyhock had done her best with what she had, and had mentally drained herself to exhaustion as she sat on her knees and sweating buckets. The villains closed in, and one of them said while ripping a plant out by the roots, "Once we get through with you, lady, we'll burn and weed whack all your stupid plants." But before they could try anything on the woman, a bramble of vine shit out from the ground, snagging several of the villains and wrapping them up or trapping them against the roof, where Ibarra came out and proclaimed, "But you'll have to whack all of us first. That's to say you have the roots to do it." Hollyhock smiled up at the holy girl and said, "I like you already, honey." Sound division. Hanky fell to his hands and knees as he coughed violently and spat blood. He had used his underused quirk with the help of a splinter to the point he ruptured his vocal cords, and now he was helpless to the remaining villains that cornered him. "Lost your voice already, 5-chord Gus?" the villain asked as Hanky glared at his old name while his head tubes hissed and snapped at him. The villains shrugged and stated, "Too bad, I almost wanted an encore." Before anything could happen, the villain was struck in the head by a punch from Kirishima, who exclaimed, "No encore, but how about a new song? One we like to call." His clone, Tetsu Tetsu, added in with his punch, before the two of them got the villain at the same time and yelled, "Beat it." Robotics division. I wish I had longer to live. I have so many mental notes on how to improve my machines. Hatsum sulked as he was wrapped and slowly being crushed by the female villain and her hair. The female laughed as she boasted, "Oh, too bad for you. Looks like your only ride now is the one to hell." Then Kamakiri came in from the side and slicked through her hair and freed the doctor. He was quickly pulled back by Zero, and once safely deposited, Uraraka came up and began to untie him. "Don't worry, Dr. H. Metal is weak, but the flesh is far stronger. And today we'll show you just that," she told him as she and the other students stood in her defense. Chemical division. "Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on." There's still more of them. Honey Lemon yelled at her giant squirt gun as she slammed her fist on it, while rapidly moving her sight from it and the villains closing in. All out of juice, they're sweetie. One of the villains vexed as the others laughed, only to be hit in the body and feet by acid and some kind of glue. But I'm not, Mina proclaimed. And neither am I, Bondo added as the two stood back to back in a superhero pose. Weapons division. During her all-out shootout with the villains, Cho quickly ran out of ammo but did not stop fighting. She used the shotgun as a bat and began to club every villain in sight before that broke over someone with a stone body quirk. She then took out 2 katanas and began to be seen like a trained samurai, slicing and dicing everyone who even tried to go after her. Cho was a force of nature and every aspect of her body was a weapon, from her hands to her feet. She used to cave someone's heads in with her heels. She finally meets her match in an electric quirk user that managed to damage her significantly and knock her swords from her grasp. But even as she was bear-hugged and electrocuted, she took the hairpin from her hair and stabbed him multiple times. Once he let go, she stabbed him in the eye before hitting his jugular. Unfortunately, this left her in a critical state as she fell to her face and was only able to shift her head enough to see up. There she saw one of the remaining villains, looking down at her with an angry expression. Dr. Orpington was only slightly better since she became vulnerable once her egg cannon ran out and her self-controlled arm chart was destroyed where she hid for cover behind the teens. "Damn it, you're one tough bitch," he commented while cracking his neck as she just stayed on the ground and breathed heavily. The villains have a snide smile and said, "But not tough enough." She growls and with what breath she has left, curses, "Screw your head," and the neck it rode in on. The villain kicked Cho in her head and grunted, "Guess we'll have to teach her some manners." "Yeah. Lesson 1, if you want to fight, make it fair," shouted Kendo as she hit the villain away. "Lesson 2, seriously rethink your life choices," Juzo exclaimed as he came from the ground and hooked his legs into the floor. "Lesson 3, don't fuck with heroes, no matter who they are." Soto glared at the villains while punching his fists. "Storehus, the barrier is almost down. Keep pushing," a villain yelled as they and several others attacked the breaking barrier with different attacks. The Morgana triplets were sweating bullets at this point as they could barely hold it together, when finally they spoke to the teens. "Hey, kids, listen closely," Megan spoke. "We're about to break, so we need you to do something for us," Millicent told them. "We've only got one trick left. To protect us and yourself as best you can." Morgan asked them with a single tear running down her face. The teens then watched in awe as the 3 women mugged into one long-haired woman with unnatural beauty as she told them, "I'm counting on you." She then breathed as her eyes turned back and spoke. Power word, kill. With that word spoken, the barrier was reabsorbed into her hand where she pushed it out into a beam of darkness that took the form of the Grim Reaper, which ran towards the villains, and any that was hit by it fell to the floor dead. When the Reaper dissipated, Morgana fell to the floor unconscious. The remaining villains came out of their hiding spots and one of them commented, "What a witch." "Yes, but the only ones getting burned at the stake is you," Momona told them as he stood before them with half of his body on fire and covered in ice. The battle rages on. CH-27, When Villains Attack Part 5. "Die," Bakugu shouted as he blasted a villain in the face as the group of 3 ran through the facility. Izuku huffed and puffed as he tried to keep up with his more physically fit guard. Even Egon was faster than him due to his crazy long legs. He wiped the sweat from his brow and said with stress, "I hope we can get to the creature division in time." The final came to the dividing in the building and Bakugu blasted down a welded shut blast door that ended up crushing 5 villains behind it. They ran through and got to the areas where the scientist and hero trackers were giving a signal. They came to a garage door that Egon threw up and called, "Please tell me you're all alive." Behind the door was Professor Cephalopod and Genus alongside all the children, safe and sound with a bunch of dead or unconscious villains. "Don't worry, Professor Egon. We're good and all thanks to these young heroes," Genus told him while motioning to the young heroes who looked scraped up. "Maybe for you, but I'm still missing all of my damn limbs," Cephalopod angrily shouted as his limbs were being bandaged up. "They'll grow back," Genus tried to assure him with a nervous smile. "In several months," he shot back. Egon sighed in relief and proclaimed, "Oh, thank the gods. We have to get to the padlocks, then to the chemical division." He told them straight after. The two professors looked at one another and asked, "Chemical division." "What's in the padlocks?" one of the students asked. "Oh, you'll see," Izuku answered vaguely as he ran off to a different part of the wing. Soon the other young heroes joined him as he crossed through a blasted open garage door that entered another empty oval-shaped room with another garage door. In it, there they found the young scientist pushing buttons on a console directly next to it. Before any of them could ask what he was doing, green light glowed and the garage doors raised while releasing a cold breeze into the room that made everyone shiver. Then Gammoth stroked out of her room and trumpeted to announce her arrival. All the teens stood back from the huge creature as it walked out, completely ignoring the kids. Izuku then quickly walked in front of the animal, and its eyes locked down on him. Gammoth raised her trunk and used it to stroke and feel the boy's face, making him strike it back in return. As they were having this moment, no one noticed how Bakugo was trying to put as much distance between him and the animals as possible, and Gammoth was keeping an eye on the teen, grumbling as he moved away. "I forgot about the woolly mammoth," Juzo stated nonchalantly. "I can't believe you did." Manga shot back at him, his head turning into a question mark and exclamation point. But before Izuku and Gammoth could enjoy their moment, he got a call, and picking it up he heard the hasty voice of Egon and exclaimed, "Izuku, he's coming. Your way. Brace yourself." Izuku's eyes widened and Gyro asked, "Who's coming?" Suddenly the sound of something running at max speed and hitting every possible thing along the way was heard down the open doorway, and people started to move to the side in the impending sense. Torchwick. Izuku drones out as the pony-sized dragon comes barreling through the hall and straight toward Izuku. He stood firm and grounded with his hands out as he shouted, "Calm down, boy. Stay. Heal. Don't dash." But he didn't get another chance to speak as the dragon leaped at him from 20 feet away and knocked him to the ground. "Do this," he groaned out, in pain as the dragon kicked his face. While Torchwick was attacking Izuku with love, everyone was standing around him in shock at what they saw until one person stayed obvious and asked, "Is that a freaking dragon?" "Yeah, he is," Izuku answered while trying to push his face away. "How, when, and why?" Ida asked in order. "Science, 2 weeks ago, and discovery," Izuku answered as Gammoth pulled the dragon off him. Before he could be questioned more, Izuku put up his hand and proclaimed, "No more questions. We have to get to the chemical division." Getting to the next division wing was far easier since not only did they have a small army on their side, but they also had Gammoth, who only had to stick in the front and bulldoze down anyone bold or stupid enough to try and get in her way. Izuku, surprisingly enough, was the one in front next to Gammoth and the first one to enter the wing and get to Honey Lemon's signal. He threw open the locked door with his super strength that had her and the others trapped within and called out, "Honey Lemon, are you dash?" Before he could finish, Honey Lemon came out right in front of him and wrapped him in a hug while exclaiming, "Alive. Yes. I'm so glad to see you, Izuku." She then realized what she was doing and put him down while fixing herself and acting more formal. "Oh, I mean, Dr. Midoriya." "Doctor," everyone asked upon hearing this. "Doctor," Izuku confirmed before getting on track and saying seriously, "But we don't have time for an explanation. Honey Lemon, we need your skills." She then stood straight and a mock salute replied, "You can count on me. What do you need?" "I need something that can either destroy or weaken reinforced concrete," he told her specifically. Honey Lemon clapped her hands and ran off while saying, "I have just the thing. Wait 1 second." While this was happening, a small group of students with Professor Egon were trying to break out of the facility through a wall with the help of Gammoth, who was having no luck. Not even Torchwick's fire breath did anything but blacken the wall. "Come on. Can't you break through one wall?" Tokaj yelled at the animal, who glared at her. "She's an animal, not a wrecking ball. Give her some credit." Koda told her off, even if she was stressed. "Have no fear. Professor Honey Lemon is here with the solution." The peppy professor said as she came into the room with several small golf-sized gel balls of strange color. The woman then proceeded to throw the gel balls at the walls where they expanded twice their splash radius and bubbled like some kind of chemical before changing colors twice. Once the solution appeared to stop, Honey Lemon commanded, "All right. Gammoth, now charge." Gammoth trumpeted loudly and charged at the wall. This time it broke all the way through. The wall crumbled like paper and Gammoth trumpeted triumphantly. Everyone go. Go, go, go. Egon commands as all the young heroes and scientists rush out of the new hole in the wall. Egon picks up his phone, disks a number and says when the other end is picked up, Nezu, we just got the students out. How are you doing? I just managed to punch through whatever it was that was blocking communication. I've sent out several distress calls. Backup should arrive soon and it looks like there's just a few minutes left in your security system reboot. Nezu reported. Thank goodness. Egon breathed a sigh of relief. I also got the security cameras up and running, and I hate to say it, but things are not looking good for our heroes. This made the professor's hair stand on ends. In all the excitement of escaping and getting the kids out, he forgot about the heroes, the villains' leaders, and that monster. That monster is far stronger than we thought, and I think they are on their last ropes, Nezu admitted, sounding worried. I hope help gets here sooner rather than later. I'll have Izuku send. Egon begins to tell him his plan before trailing off. Nezu notices the one-way silence and says, Professor. Egon looks around for a bit and then asks the dissipating crowds, where's Izuku? And Torchwick? Oh no, don't tell me ... he says while looking towards the inside of the building. Gammoth also seemed to realize what happened and she turned tail and charged. Back inside, Egon, who dropped his phone with Nezu still on the line, ran after the mammoth and called out, Gammoth. Wait. CH-28, When Villains Attack Part 6. The heroes had done all they could in the fight against the Nomu, but it still wasn't enough. That thing was faster, stronger, and more durable than either of them, and, worst of all, it could heal. Their quirks almost did nothing to the monster, and any damage done was nothing. Pretty soon they were overtaken and beaten down. Badly. Eraserhead had his face smashed in and his spine nearly crushed. Present. MIC had his leg broken and his neck chopped so hard it damaged his vocals. Blood. Vlad took a blow to the head hard enough to knock him clean out. So the three heroes lay on the ground in a heap of themselves with the monster slowly skulking towards them, ready to finish the job. Present MIC, with still working arms, crawled over to the downed Eraserhead and told him, Shota, I hate to say it, but this looks like the end. Eraserhead barely lifted his head to look at the oncoming monster and replied, I think you might be right. Soon they saw the monster stop, go low, and dash toward them. It was great to fight alongside you, MIC told his friend while closing his eyes. You as well, Erasure agreed while also looking away. However, their imminent demise didn't come, and instead, they were met with a strong whipping wind hitting their faces. When they opened their eyes they saw the Nomu trapped behind what looked to be a wall of wind. Confused as to who their savior was, they were drawn to the sound of someone yelling at the monster. Leave them alone, a young voice yelled at the beast as they saw the determined face of Izuku holding out his hand. Ignoring the wall of wind and monster for a moment, Eraserhead lifted his head and yelled as loud as he could muster. What are you doing here, kid? Get out of here, and leave you to die. No thanks. Izuku shot back as he used the wall to push the Noun back, but the creature tried to dig in its feet to keep from sliding, which Izuku changed up to forming spikes of wind that pierced its body, causing it to be pushed away from the helpless heroes. Izuku then sprouted a pair of wings made of the wind and flew just as fast right in between the monster and the heroes. It's our job. It's what we're prepared for. Present MIC tried to argue with him, but Izuku wasn't having any of it as he shot back while arguing. Just because you could die doesn't mean you should. Izuku saw how the Nomu broke through the wind spikes and after healing its wounds, tried to run toward them once more. But Izuku used the space-bending quirk and turned the monster into an abstract artwork. Normally this quirk would cause anyone to become completely immobile from the shock, but the creature started to move outside of the bubble. Izuku realized that the monster was very mindless and wasn't affected by the quirk, knowing it was more of an illusory mental attack. The two heroes looked at the boy in shock and Present MIC exclaimed with his damaged voice, Whoa, I thought you were quirkless. Where'd all that come from? Izuku then erected a wall made of stone around them as the Nomu was starting to come out of the space bubble. Once their defense was made, he turned back and complained, Can we discuss this after we take down the giant monster? I hate to tell you this, kid, but none of us are in any shape to stand, let alone fight, Eraserhead told him. Wasn't talking about you, Izuku corrected him. Before either of them could ask what he meant, they heard a high-pitched, screeching noise coming from above. Looking up, they saw something on blood. Orange-red wings flying in circles around the auditorium. The creature circled a few more times before finally hovering in the air while screeching. Is that a dash? Eraserhead began to ask. Dragon, Tomura shouted in shock. Torchwick breathed a hefty stream of fire down on the two villains and Kurogiri, opened a portal to divert its flow. However, he brought it down too fast and both had to dodge when the pony-sized lizard swooped down on them with claws and teeth ready. Torchwick doubled around after his first attack and shot several fireballs at the two villains, causing them to dodge and move further away from one another. What the hell kind of science lab is this place? Tomura exclaimed as he swatted out his shirt that was starting to smoke. One where we truly underestimated them, Kurogiri inferred while swatting soot off his outfit. How? This place was newly built and just starting. How could our sources have fallen so far from what it was? Tomura stressed. In all fairness, we did do it last minute when UA decided to come here instead of the USJ, Kurogiri told him, making Tomura growl. But he didn't have time to stew in anger as Torchwick came down and blasted the two villains with a smoke screen. Tomura attempted to suze out Kurogiri in the smoke, but even though it was one cover, it was so thick that it was like walking through a first on a new moon. Then he saw a pair of glowing eyes in the dark and walked to them, only for the eyes to flash a set of teeth and jump him. Despite his unhealthy-looking physique, Tomura was surprisingly fast and strong. However, now wasn't one of those times for him to show it. Despite Torchwick being smaller than the man, he was far stronger than most humans and had the man pinned down with his claws as he dug his fangs into his throat. Torchwick had him in such a position that not only could Tomura only kick his legs, but he couldn't even make a sound. Torchwick was doing what all predators do and choking out their prey before eating it. Tomura attempted to bring up his hand to use his quirk, but every time he did, the claws would only sink deeper in. Tomura was starting to black out and he could see his whole life flash before his eyes, and it was horrible. Just before everything went out and he was devoured by the animal, a gunshot rang out and Torchwick let go of the villain. He stretched out in pain as he stumbled off his body and Tomura gasped for air. He looked over and saw the dragon with a bullet wound on his shoulder, and looked to the other side to see Kurogiri with a gun in hand, pointing it at the small creature. Torchwick trunks to the man and screeches. Kurogiri points the gun again, but this time when he fires another bullet, Torchwick evaporates it alongside the portal the mist man attempts to put up in defense, setting the man ablaze for a moment. But it is only for a moment as Tomura rolls over and slaps his hand on the animal's flank, causing it to decay to the point where its rib cage and organ are exposed. Torchwick falls to the ground, appearing dead. Tomura gets up and walks back over to the mist man as he manages to put the fire out before it can engross him further, only for the two of them to watch as the seemingly dead body of Torchwick rises and the wound begins to rapidly heal. Tomura growls at this and looks back over to the Nomu, expecting several corpses to be strung about. Instead, he sees the Nomu trying to break through the many layers of stone walls that are easily replaced and added on by Izuku to keep it at bay. Enough of this crap. I'm gonna get rid of that kid myself, Tomura proclaims, while stamping over the monster and teen. Meanwhile, the Nomu had just broken through the last stone wall and came upon the sight of nothing. No matter where it looked, the other side of the ever-growing stone walls was nothing. It was like the heroes just disappeared. However, that is only half true. The heroes and Izuku did disappear, but only from sight and not the spot. In truth, the young man and prose had turned completely invisible, and the mindless creature didn't seem to know or understand this as it just stood there and looked around. But its attention was caught when Tomura announced, "Nomu, get the flying lizard." The Nomu obeyed its command and turned tail to run after the regenerating dragonling. Tomura, who saw the trick being played out, ran and tackled Izuku, causing the invisibility to drop. Before he could use his quirk on the teen, Izuku turned into smoke and slipped right out from him while rising into the air. After reforming and sprouting the wings of the wind, Izuku used the wind to create blades of it while throwing them down on all the villains and the monster. Kurogiri opened portals to avoid them while Tomura dodged with every ounce of speed he had yet still got nicked, while the Nomu took everything head-on and grew back. Whatever was sliced or removed. Izuku saw this happen and wanted to try something else, but didn't get the chance as Tomura appeared from a portal above and drop-kicked him back to the ground. The villain went to grab him with his hand, but only managed to grab and decay his coat before Izuku turned around, grabbed his arm, and using his super strength, threw the man away. Izuku then grabbed and ripped up a huge section of seats in the auditorium and threw it at the villain. Kurogiri opened another portal and allowed the seats to fly straight through. Izuku then creates a tornado around the villain to trap them while he tries to subdue the monster. He runs after the creature, and with all his strength sends a punch right into its back. Much to his surprise, his fist is absorbed into its body before sending him flying back like a trampoline. Izuku realized quickly that physical attacks won't work any better than mental, so he'd have to try something else and fast. He saw the monster's exposed brain and started to craft the wind into blades once more, aiming for the weak spot. However, he didn't get the chance as Tomura is upon him again and the two of them went locked into a game of cat and mouse. Meanwhile, Torchwick had completely healed itself and even pushed out the bullet wound from its side. After cracking its neck, it saw the huge creature barreling at him. He tried to deter it with a shriek, but it didn't even flinch at his display of aggression. He took to the air, though he didn't get far as his tail was grabbed by the monster. That was the wrong thing to do as Torchwick set it ablaze with fire. The Nomu grabbed at its face to ward off the fire, freeing Torchwick and allowing it to take to the ceiling above, where he flew in circles and began to pepper him with fireballs. The Nomu's vision returned and it turned its back against the onslaught of fire. The creature looked back, saw the small dragon, and jumped toward it. The monster grabbed the dragon and threw it to the ground, where it landed on top of him, causing it to cry out in pain from its broken ribs. The Nomu grabbed the dragon's head and tried to crush it while Torchwick fought back and breathed fire. But it did very little. He was still so young and his fire wasn't anything to scream about. The little creature had to do something, otherwise this thing would kill him. Suddenly something stored in the little animal's soul, and something like a small flame that was engulfed into something akin to the feeling of a wildfire that blazed within him. And with a newfound sense of fire and vigor, Torchwick expelled a blast of fire so hot and so powerful that it melted the monster's hand clear off its face and much of the arm attached. Torchwick used its superheated fangs to rip off the Nomu's foot from his body, and used its surprisingly long tail to whip it in the head, stunning it and causing it to fall over. Once Torchwick was back up on his own feet, he rammed the downed creature in its head with his horns before grabbing it by the back, lifting it into the air as far as he could before dropping it down. The Nomu bounced like a ball before Torchwick came down on it, returning the previous favor and setting its back on fire with a wave of flames. The small creature then took the monster's good leg in its teeth and threw it toward the stage, where Nomu got caught in the curtains, thus allowing the dragon to breathe a stream of fire that set the drapes on fire with the caught monster. Torchwick thought he had defeated its foe until another gunshot was heard and the dragon felt something hit the back of its head. He scratched the area and pulled out a bullet. Turning around to see Kurogiri, he wasted no time in shooting a fireball at the mist man. As usual, Kurogiri tried to put up a portal for the flaming ball to pass through, but instead, it burned through the portal and hit him dead on. Kurogiri screamed as he was set on fire and desperately tried to roll himself out. Torchwick saw this, licked his lips, and got low like a stalking predator. He would take out the mist man before calcifying the other man that was quickly overtaking Izuku. Though he didn't get the chance, the Nomu, now mostly healed up, jumped out of its flaming person, tackled the dragon, and tried to crush it in his hands. Torchwick countered by latching down on its exploded brain and getting ready to fire. But the Nomu learned from its old mistakes and grabbed the dragon's neck and chest. Torchwick countered again by clawing its face and arms while stabbing it in the neck with his tail. Meanwhile, Izuku was not doing so well against the far more experienced villain. And even with several quirks at his disposal, Izuku still had no experience in fighting and was just trying to hit him with whatever he had. It had gotten to the point that Izuku was flying around with the villain doing everything in his power to touch him, leading to a mid-air tussle where Izuku was using his super strength to either hold back or snap the villain's bones. He was even trying to hypnotize him, but that didn't seem to do anything. Eventually, he was slammed into a wall and the villain pushed off against it and sent Izuku falling to the ground where they both took a nosedive. After crashing, Tomura was back upon Izuku and was trying to rot him away, but Izuku used his super strength to hold him back and break his bones, but was starting to lose his focus in all the chaos. Yet having his bones broken didn't seem to deter Tomura as he saw the look of desperation and fear on the teen's face as he continued to press down despite his wrists about to snap like glow sticks. He growled down at the teen with malicious intent while asking, "Any last words?" Izuku's expression changed for a moment to calm, and with a smile of his own he replied, "Flame on." Tomura felt something sticky and cold hit his wrist as they were being held back. But he didn't have time to question it as suddenly the teen and himself were engulfed in flames. Tomura screamed as he was set ablaze, and Izuku used the opportunity to punch him in the face and send his burning body flying. "Young master," Kurogiri cried out as he rushed to his ward. "Put me out. Put me out." Tomura cried out in desperation as he tried to wipe the fire from his body. The mist man quickly produced a fire extinguisher from a portal and put the young man out, who lay on the ground in exhaustion and pain. Kurogiri leaned down and felt Tomura's body, feeling something sticky on him and realizing what it was, observed aloud, "Kerosene gel." He then stood up, looked towards Izuku with his pistol, and told him, "I hope you realize I have to kill you. Now. Not if we have anything to say about it." A voice yelled at him as the sound of heavy fast footsteps ran towards them. When the two villains looked in the direction of the new voice, their barreling through the destroyed auditorium was Egon on the back of a charging and angry looking Gammoth. The villains didn't have a moment to spare as Gammoth was upon them and using her tusks to send them flying off in the opposite direction. When they crashed into the other side, the mammoth continued her charging, and once she was upon them again, she raised on her back legs and brought her front ones down. Kurogiri rapped away while Tamor rolled, though this didn't deter her as she relentlessly went after the one she could still see. Then using her forelimb she held down Tomura, wrapped her trunk around his neck, and began to pull. Tomura could only flail like a fish as the ancient elephant attempted to pull him apart. But he survived this when Kurogiri remanifested and shot her in the side. Thanks to her woolly coat, thick skin, and a layer of fat, the bullet did very little damage and only pissed her off even more. Grumbling at the mist man, she let her foot off the young man and used him like a flail to smack right into the mist man, sending him and Tomura flying away as she trumped angrily. After collecting himself, catching his breath, and shaking off the previous feeling of nearly being pulled apart, Tomura commented in anguish, "Now a woolly mammoth. What the fuck is this place?" Ejin, who had jumped off Gammoth a while ago, saw Torchwick struggling against the Nomu and said to the elephant, "Gammoth, go help Torchwick." Gammoth looked at the monster, grumbled and charged at it while Ejin pointed an angry finger to Izuku while telling him, "You and I will talk later." Izuku sighs in stress and replies, "I know." Gammoth charged at full speed towards the monster and it had no time to react as the huge animal rammed into it, causing it to fly off and release Torchwick. Gammoth then held the monster down, grabbed one of its limbs with her trunk, and pulled until the limb came off. When the monster showed no signs of being affected by the limb ripping or being dead, she kept pulling off limbs until she finally got to the head. But by then, the Nomu regrew its first arm and grabbed the trunk. After ripping it off its neck, its other limbs grew back and it stood up before taking Gammoth by the trunk, swinging her around, and throwing her to the side. After doing so, Torchwick surprised the monster and tried to chew off its brain. But the Nomu caught him before any mange could be made. Gammoth got back to her feet after being thrown and saw Torchwick fighting the Nomu again. She charged once more, but this time the monster saw her and threw off the dragon. It collided fist with tusk and they both cancelled each other out. Despite her strength and size, she was far slower than the Nomu and its punches broke through her defenses with ease, leaving her to flail about as she tried to swat at it. Torchwick aided and distracted the creature by attacking the part of its back it could reach, which gave Gammoth more than enough time to swing herself towards the monster and slam it with her tusks, but the blow was shot right back at her with its bouncy skin. Changing her tactics, she raised on her hind legs and brought her forelimbs down. However, Nomu caught them. Gammoth raised tons and was putting all her weight into the rushing attack, but the Nomu was far stronger than her weight and was starting to push her back until Torchwick came to its chest and breathed a hole right through its torso, weakening the monster and allowing her to crush the monster underfoot. Unlike last time, the Nomu's body didn't bounce it back, but only absorbed it for a moment before starting to cave in from the constant pressure. Gammoth put all her weight into flattening the monster while Torchwick blew fire in its face, making the monster cover up with its still-free hands. Meanwhile, the villains were in a losing battle with the two scientists. Their only defense was Kurogiri's portals as the two men hit them with a plethora of quirks. Using the space bubble quirk, Izuku would destroy their defense while Egon would either shoot lasers or breathe out freezing ice. Kurogiri would put up a new portal just as fast when blades of wind came to their way and bolts of electricity from Egon. Kurogiri would try to use the gun every chance he got, but Izuku would put up a stone wall, and when it felt like they would change positions thanks to invisibility and start the cycle again. If things for the villains didn't look bleak before, then their chances slipped further. When Ejin called for the Mimicuties to attack, before they knew it, the villains were beset by a whole horde of lock boxes with major awards and teeth. Luckily, this was one of the things that Tomura could do in the long-range shootout and managed to take out every Mimicutie that got close enough but still got kicked or bit up here and there. In a calm panic, Kurogiri informed him, "Young master, we must retreat. You are in no shape to continue fighting and All Might still isn't here. We can use Nomu another day." "No, not until one of them is dead," Tomura agreed while gritting his teeth. Tomura looked over at his monster only to see it getting manhandled by the two animals. Even though the mobster had gotten back to its feet, it was knocked in its brain by a seat wrapped in the trunk of Gammoth before getting grabbed by Torchwick and getting flown headfirst into a wall as more fire was breathed on it. "You were saying, young master?" Kurogiri inquired. Tomura gripped and rotted the ground in frustration before exclaiming, "I want the Nomu to kill the heroes at least." Kurogiri obliged this request and commanded the monster, "Nomu, dispose of the heroes." Just as the Nomu was crawling out of the rubble, a voice called over the PA system, "Oh, you'll be doing no such thing." "The rat," Tomura growled. He announced excitedly, "because the security system is back online." "Boy, did that feel longer than 5 minutes." A small chuckle was heard as he stated with a dark tone, which means, "Warning, all kill protocols have been engaged and all non-registered vital records will be immediately eliminated." The security system announced. "I would say it was nice to know you, but, well, you know," Nezu told them as several miniguns descended from the ceiling and pointed at the villains and their monster. "Dance, you vile monkeys, dance." "Ah ha 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 ha," Nezu cackled wildly. "Sometimes I forget he's a high-functioning sociopath." Egon stressed with a sweat drop as Izuku stood there in uncomfortable silence. Without a moment to spare, the guns began to fire on all cylinders at them with fatal intent. Kurogiri acted fast and wrapped his form around Tomura in a protective shield, causing the bullets to pass straight through harmlessly. The Naum, on the other hand, was peppered with so much firepower that its bouncy skin broke within seconds and holes opened all over its body, turning it from monster to Swiss cheese in seconds. Gammoth then grabbed the stunned monster by the foot and threw it into a Tesla gate where it was shocked with several thousand joules of electricity before getting flung out by the power and straight into Torchwick's mouth, where he grabbed its brain and bit off a huge chunk, only for the guns to pepper it even more to the point the system detected no more life, where it turned back to the villain to subject them to bullet hell. "Welp, there goes your monster," Nezu chuckled in a vexing tone to the villains. Without another word for argument, Kurogiri engulfed himself around Tomura and began to teleport him, where the young man angrily declared, "This isn't the last you've seen of me. Mark my words, I'll be back again and I'll tear you and the place to nothing." With that, the last two villains vanished and the security system stopped, no longer sensing the intruders. CH-29, Aftermath. "I am here," All Might announced while striking a pose as he jumped into a crowd of heroes and lore officials surrounding the NIP facility. "You are late," Nezu stated next to the huge man, who landed just inches by accidentally stepping on him. "What? Late. All Might exclaimed in surprise while looking down at the mouse. Yes, All Might, late. The villains are dealt with and the day is saved. Mostly. Izuku told him as he lay in a stretcher with an EMT tending to his wounds. All Might looked around at the area, seeing that present MIC, Erasrihead, and Blood Vlad were in several states of injury with all being tended to by EMT. No. Doubt they were in a huge battle, and so he inquired, all thanks to you. 3. Right. Nezu shook his head and explained, not this time. It was a great deal of thanks to the scientists and staff of NIP and the students of classes 1A and 1B. That's surprising, but wonderful to hear, All Might exclaimed, with zeal. Ahem. If I may interject. A voice called out in between their conversation. Nezu then walked up to the man and motioned with his paw. He introduced. Ah. All Might, this is Professor Egon Cristallo, the head researcher and owner of NIP. Egon nods and says with a bit of malice, Principal Nezu failed to mention you'd come today. But putting that aside, why were you late? You could have been of great help. All Might taps his fingertips together and starts. Well, where should I start? Egon slaps his face while looking away and waving his hand as he tells him, on second thought, never mind. I hope nothing too bad happened. All Might asks in a concerned tone. Egon raised his eyebrow and listed off. You mean apart from being invaded, hacked, trapped, attacked, and have in the ballpark range of $1 million in damages due to the attack, alongside the injuries accrued by my staff. All Might felt awkward now as he could almost taste the man's irritation, and, trying to change the subject, he asked while looking ready, well, anyway, where are the villains? Present MIC shivered hard in a mix of disgust and fear, everywhere. All Might was confused by his reaction and vague answer until he saw what he meant. A few hundred yards away, All Might could see a crime scene cleaning crew go in and out of the building with body bag after body bag, adding toe tags, writing down information, taking pictures of the cadavers, and so forth. All Might saw it was bad, but it couldn't be as bad as present MIC was saying, until he overheard an officer say that they had about 200 dead villains in total to report about, and that was just a ballpark estimation since many more hadn't been found, couldn't be identified, and one of them was found inside of a plant with teeth. All Might gulped as he tried to find a new escape plan, and seeing the two groups of UA students being questioned, he said, I think I'll just go that way. Once All Might had dashed off in a fake attempt of concern, Nezu sighed and turned to Egon to tell him, well, Professor, I can't help but feel I owe you an apology. Egon was taken aback in shock by this statement and countered, I mean you did apologize for you out-of-control student, which I'm not forgiving you for, but I don't think I'm owed more. If it weren't for me, these villains wouldn't have come and put your facility, and, more importantly, your employees in danger. I'm truly sorry, we'll pay for everything, he told him while bowing deeply. Egon waved his hands rapidly and said with a mix of stress and nervousness, Nezu, please don't apologize for that. It's not your fault. No one could have expected something like this. And besides, I should be the one to thank you for allowing your students to fight in our defense. We'd probably be dead if not. He then calmed down at seeing the mouse still bowing, only to tell him, and please don't worry about paying for everything. I only expected what Bakugu broke, anything you give I'll accept as a donation. New raised his head with a smile and told him, thank you, Professor. I hope we can rebuild our relationship in the coming future. Egon smiled back but told him in a serious tone, I wouldn't mind that, just keep that child on a tight leash and away from my lab until he has a major attitude adjustment. Nezu chuckles dryly while sweat drops, agreeing with his demand. Egon then walked away from the mouse and back to the facility where Izuku was sitting on the steps as he was questioned by the police. Once he was certain no one could hear him, he moved to Erasrihead as the EMT finished with him, and the tired man asked him, did you find out anything? Nezu nods and tells him in a serious tone, lots and lots. Your source was right. Eraser. Something is going on there. And it's strange, to say the least. I'm not sure how they are doing it, but it has something to do with those splinters. I mean, quirks. In a crystal? That's new to me. Should I keep an eye on them? Eraser offers. Nezu nods and says, please do. I feel as though they have good intentions, but if they turn bad, We'll have to do something drastic. Eraserhead sighs and stresses. I hope it doesn't come to that. I don't know how. Anyone is gonna take on a highly secure facility, an army of robots, a dragon, a woolly mammoth, quirks in a bottle, 2 animals on the same intelligence level as you, and whatever else they got cooking up in there. To which Nezu silently nods, while thinking up all the worst scenarios. And is that everything? The officer asked as he took down the final note from Egon and Izuku. Yes, sir. That's everything we can tell and what's on the video feed we gave you. Izuku affirmed. So about this dead monster. Where is it? The officer asks while lifting the brim of his hat to look around and inside the building. Good question. Pretty sure the villains made off with it after they made their escape. We don't even have a recording of it disappearing on the tape. Trust me, we reviewed it after seeing it vanish. Egon points out. Well, that sure is a predicament. The officer sighs while noting it down. I'm sorry about what happened to your facility, and I hope that you're able to rebuild it quickly. Have a nice day, sirs. He tells them while tipping his hat before walking away. Izuku and Egon waved off the officer, and once he was out of earshot, Egon turned to Izuku and congratulated him. Good thinking with the invisibility splinter. Izuku. After seeing that thing in action, I'm really curious how it ticks. Izuku. All Might felt awkward now as he could almost taste the man's irritation, and, trying to change the subject, he asked while looking ready. Well, anyway, where are the villains? Present MIC shivered hard in a mix of disgust and fear. Everywhere. All Might was confused by his reaction and vague answer until he saw what he meant. A few 100 yards away, All Might could see a crime scene cleaning crew go in and out of the building with body bag after body bag, adding toe tags, writing down information, taking pictures of the cadavers, and so forth. All Might saw it was bad, but it couldn't be as bad as present MIC was saying, until he overheard an officer say that they had about 200 dead villains in total to report about, and that was just a ballpark estimation since many more hadn't been found, couldn't be identified, and one of them was found inside of a plant with teeth. All Might gulped as he tried to find a new escape plan, and seeing the 2 groups of UA students being questioned, he said, I think I'll just go that way. Once All Might had dashed off in a fake attempt of concern, Nezu sighed and turned to Egon to tell him, Well, Professor, I can't help but feel I owe you an apology. Egon was taken aback in shock by this statement and countered, I mean you did apologize for you out-of-control student, which I'm not forgiving you for, but I don't think I'm owed more. If it weren't for me, these villains wouldn't have come and put your facility, and, more importantly, your employees in danger. I'm truly sorry, we'll pay for everything, he told him while bowing deeply. Egon waved his hands rapidly and said with a mix of stress and nervousness, Nezu, please don't apologize for that. It's not your fault. No one could have expected something like this. And besides, I should be the one to thank you for allowing your students to fight in our defense. We'd probably be dead if not. He then calmed down at seeing the mouse still bowing, only to tell him, and please don't worry about paying for everything. I only expected what Bakugo broke, anything you give I'll accept as a donation. New raised his head with a smile and told him, Thank you, Professor. I hope we can rebuild our relationship in the coming future. Egon smiled back but told him in a serious tone, I wouldn't mind that, just keep that child on a tight leash and away from my lab until he has a major attitude adjustment. Nezu chuckles dryly while sweat drops, agreeing with his demand. Egon then walked away from the mouse and back to the facility where Izuku was sitting on the steps as he was questioned by the police. Once he was certain no one could hear him, he moved to Eraserhead as the EMT finished with him, and the tired man asked him, Did you find out anything? Nezu nods and tells him in a serious tone, Lots and lots. Your source was right. Eraser. Something is going on there. And it's strange, to say the least. I'm not sure how they are doing it, but it has something to do with those splinters. I mean, quirks. In a crystal? That's new to me. Should I keep an eye on them? Eraser offers. Nezu nods and says, Please do. I feel as though they have good intentions, but if they turn bad, we'll have to do something drastic. Eraserhead sighs and stresses. I hope it doesn't come to that. I don't know how. Anyone is gonna take on a highly secure facility, an army of robots, a dragon, a woolly mammoth, quirks in a bottle, Two animals on the same intelligence level as you and whatever else they got cooking up in there, to which Nezu silently nods, while thinking up all the worst scenarios. And is that everything? The officer asked as he took down the final note from Egon and Izuku. Yes, sir, that's everything we can tell and what's on the video feed we gave you. Izuku affirmed. So about this dead monster. Where is it? The officer asks while lifting the brim of his hat to look around and inside the building. Good question. Pretty sure the villains made off with it after they made their escape. We don't even have a recording of it disappearing on the tape. Trust me, we reviewed it after seeing it vanish. Egon points out. Well, that sure is a predicament. The officer sighs while noting it down. I'm sorry about what happened to your facility, and I hope that you're able to rebuild it quickly. Have a nice day, sirs. He tells them while tipping his hat before walking away. Izuku and Egon waved off the officer, and once he was out of earshot, Egon turned to Izuku and congratulated him. Good thinking with the invisibility splinter. Izuku. After seeing that thing in action, I'm really curious how it ticks. Izuku smiles at the praise given until Egon follows up. Now just one thing remains. Where did you put the invisible giant dead creature? Izuku opens his mouth to answer, then shoots open his eyes and goes silent and pale, which is more than enough of an answer for Egon, who sucks air between his teeth and laments. Oh boy, this is gonna be fun. CH-30, Experimental Log, Top Secret, Autopsy. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting on a highly classified experiment with Professor Egon Cristallo and Professor Otto Cephalopod. For reference, a few days ago, we were attacked by the League of Villains when the head hero classes of UA came by. We survived, obviously, but we managed to kill and hide the body of the monsters they called the Nomu. After turning it invisible to hide it, we simultaneously lost it and then found it again within the stomach of a particular large Mimikyu. Now we are starting an autopsy and dissection of the creature to find out its workings. Begin. By looking at the cadaver, we can't immediately tell if it is human or not. Although it has an upright posture and hands with opposable digits, it could very well be some kind of animal mutated with human DNA. Professor Cephalopod has taken several blood and tissue samples to Dr. Oppington to determine the exact creature it is. Several things about the cadaver stick out, the first being its massive height and muscle mass. This thing is nearly taller than All Might himself and is one of the tallest people in Japan, and just as, if not more so, muscular than he is. I have never seen larger muscles on anything that doesn't have it as a quirk or through the use of drugs. These muscles are so big I'm surprised the creature was able to move in the first place, yet it could run with such grace and turn on a dime. Going back to its height-to-body composition ratio, the only other person taller than this thing is the hero Fat Gum and his quirk fat absorption. But his height is natural and his body fat is far less dense than regular fat, making it easy for him to walk, move, and fight. The cadaver probably has some sort of hidden mechanic in its body similar to it. The second thing that sticks out right away is its brain. Although heavily damaged in the fight, its cranium was non-existent, allowing it to be exposed. Not clear, not some thin transparent filament, not even invisible, just exposed right to the nasal bone. The whole reason for the skull is to protect the extremely fragile brain, which is the main function of the whole body of any complex creature. The fact that something so important was just exposed to whatever in the world makes me think it's not so important for the creature's survival. Despite it having many wrinkles in it, allowing for intelligent thought, it did not show any sort of intelligence and took orders when directly given like a trained dog or AI. The other surprising thing was its eyes, which just seemed to be hooked directly into the brain. What purpose this serves or even if it could see is unknown. The third thing that sticks out is its skin, charcoal black. It's not hard or rough or anything, it's quite soft and squishy, almost like jello when touched. Which explains why it was able to take blows but not cuts. We had to stop Professor Cephalopod from playing with it midway through the observation process. Though, I will admit it is quite fun. Like playing with pudding. Then the final thing that sticks out is its pants, which leads us to believe it was human in the first place. After all, why put any clothing on an animal? Humans are the only ones with a sense of shame. So after pulling them down, we were surprised to see that it had no male genitalia whatsoever. In fact, it had no genitals at all. I guess during its transformation, it lost them or they got removed, but no signs of scar tissue could be seen, so surgery is ruled out. With the observation portion out of the way, now we move on to the actual autopsy and dissection. Carefully removing what was left of the brain, we find that it has the same amount of wrinkles, shape, size, and color as a human brain. The eyes hooked right into the optic center have shown no sign of surgical meddling, meaning that the eyes being so close to the brain tell it's a result of a quirk. Seeing how close the distance is, now we can assess that the creature had an excellent vision that could also process fast-moving images quickly. We'll send the brain off for more in-depth testing of its intrinsic signals and how they move. Moving down, we find that the lower jaw is, or was, completely intact with a full set of human teeth over a large beak, a normal thing for those with an avian quirks. But why have this feature at all? Perhaps it's vestibular like the genitals and brain. Either way, upon cutting into it, we find the vocals to be extremely damaged, almost as if they had been inflamed and then constricted, not allowing for any intelligent speech and being limited to grunts and roars. From here we open the creature's body cavity, and boy is it a mess. Its lungs and heart have been inflamed to massive proportions, which is needed for a creature of its size, in addition to having a second heart. It has no stomach, liver, pancreas, or gallbladder, and in place is a single organ that I can only guess is to keep it sustained. It has just shy of 2 inches of intestines, both large and small, no reproductive organs, and no rectum or anus. Honestly, this thing is just a mess. After cutting it open further, we discovered that its bones are made entirely of metal. That explains how something so big and heavy could hold itself up. The metal is unique and nothing has been seen, even amongst quirks like it. We attempted to cut into it with several methods, but only got success after using a plasma's cutter and found it was metal all the way through, allowing for the support of such a huge body and showing it had very unusual metabolic needs. Next, we took a look at its muscle composition, and it's amazing. The muscles are like that of an 8-fold metal samurai sword, muscles stacked on top of one another, making them huge. It explains its superhuman strength and how it was able to withstand the crushing weight of a 6-ton mammoth several times. Its ligaments were in the same category as its muscles but were far more flexible, allowing for easy movement. After this, we assumed that our dissection of the creature was complete until we saw parts of its body regenerating. We almost assumed it was still alive, but after evacuating the room and putting heavy firearms next to it, making sure if it got up, it wouldn't again, we say it wasn't still alive. After checking its unbeating heart and brainless head, it was concluded that it was most definitely dead. So after calming down, we saw how the body was repairing itself, but ever so slowly, even in death. This thing's regeneration is amazing. We didn't think it would be able to self-resurrect, but just to be sure we didn't have a starfish case on our hands, we separated the creature into many different parts. After this, we took several skin, muscle, and bone samples for further study while we burned the rest. With that, this ends our dissection of the cadaver. Note, fire destroys the regeneration process. This is Dr. Midoriya again, coming to report with more news on the cadaver. And honestly, I'm terrified and sickened to even try and talk about it. After sending the blood, flesh, and brain to Orpington to be further studied, we found out several things about the creature. 1. That thing was definitely a human, no doubt about it. 2. While whatever was happening to it, this person was still alive. And 3. The person's mind was still in there, buried deep away. How we figured. This was thanks to the doctor testing all its parts. Apparently, she made a machine that when hooked up to any amount of brain matter, so long as it's intact and not damaged to the point of being considered chopped meat, it can actively read and recreate certain images or thoughts of a person. I hear the recordings, dispute Egon's warnings, and I wish I had listened. The person was in there, buried deep behind who knows what, and was in pain the whole time, begging to stop or to just kill them. These screams, God, these screams are gonna haunt me. Nothing like what you see and hear in the movies, not even close. But I can't feel bad now. What's done is done, and I hope they are at peace. And at the very least I can be assured knowing there is nothing that could be done for them. No reset button or cure. Just the release of death. Okay, I'm rambling, but in essence, the reason for this is the cadaver's quirk or, rather, many quirks. It had so many in its body. And I'm not talking like 2 or 3, I'm talking like dozens. It had so many and had been mutated so far that death was the only humane thing to do. In order it had the following quirks were designated by name: bird person, soft and stretch, muscles, big and wide, super organ, W heal, metal bones, mind null, super punch out. Bird person, an avian quirk that I assume was supposed to give the power of flight but only manifests as a bird's beak. Soft and stretch, this one allows the body to stretch and absorb blows like there is nothing, nearly making the body similar to rubber. Muscle, this gives the increased muscle mass that stacks on top of one another but no superhuman strength. Big and wide, makes a person taller and wider at the shoulders. Super organ, makes certain organs far larger in the body and changes certain parts to compensate for it. W heal, grants super speed regeneration and a natural cooling system that prevents the body from catching fire at rapidly regeneration cells. Metal bones, makes bones into metal. Mind null, makes a mind blank to the point of being immune to mental attacks and pain, and acts separately for the action of the body or allows for implanted control. Super punch out, this gives the super strength factor for the increase in muscles. After this, I started to wonder why this creature was made with such a specific set of quirks. It couldn't have been just a coincidence, and it wasn't. That's when I realized that this thing was designed to kill All Might. And it makes sense. The height to not be at a size disadvantage, the super strength to go against his own and all the other things to accommodate it, the skin to absorb blows, the super regeneration for any damage done, and the attempted avian quirk. All Might specifically has trouble with foes who can fly. This thing was made to be an All Might killer. Luckily they didn't count on us, Gammoth or Torchwick. We still have the skin and muscle for further testing, and Otto has requested to make a splinter of the cadaver's quirks. Egon greenlit this project, curious if it could even be done or if we would have to separate all the other quirks into separate splinters. Well, find out soon enough. However, there is only one question remaining. Where did the League get that thing and who made it at all? End of log. CH31, a new problem, a different solution. Okay people, Egon stated as he slapped a meeting table that he and the entire staff of NIP were all sitting around. Now I'm sure you all know why I've called you all here today, he asked them rhetorically. Because it's your birthday, Izuku asked innocently. No. Is it my birthday? Asked Hanky. No. Are we getting a raise? Genus asked hopefully. No. You're gonna give me full and unrestricted access to the Singularity Soul. Hatsum exclaimed in excitement. No. You finally got a girlfriend at 30, Cho asked while slapping the table as Orpington clucked a laugh. Are we gonna do this? Egon asked back, already done with this charade. Then Honey Lemon spoke up and asked cautiously, does it have to do with the fact that we were attacked and well underprepared, only getting out of it by the skin of our teeth due to our adversaries not doing their homework on us? The massive damages accrued by the said attack, or the rapidly developing dragon we have stored away? Egon sighs as he runs his nose and answers back, yes on all fronts. Going in no order, although the damages we faced were rather extravagant, we are more than able to fix them thanks to our funds and the ones provided by UA as a sorry our donation. On the other hand, if this event has taught us anything it's that we are sourly underprepared for what's to come. We're working with tech and knowledge that I'm sure countries will go to war for. So we have to outfit this facility with all the measures of a small country's worth of military protection. So, that is why I want all of you to be firing on all cylinders to make this place as secure as possible. This is a top priority. I'm talking about new tech, security, codes, defenses, force fields, anti-warp quirk generators, literally anything you can think or make to get this place as safe and secure as possible, he exclaimed. Yes, sir, everyone around the table replied in unison. And, the dragon? Otto inquired. Ah yes, him, Egon said with a huff before stressing, little Torchwick isn't so little anymore. I liked him better when he was the size of a parrot, Orpington squawked in complaint. So you could bully him, Otto chastised her. He tried to eat me, she fought back. Once and only once, Otto corrected her as she tried to peck at his newly grown tentacles. We still haven't fully determined how big he'll grow, and I don't think we can continue increasing the enclosure sizes for him. Heck, I don't think such a thing could exist, especially alongside the fact that he can fly, Izuku lamented. And we can't just let him go gallivanting off wherever he wants, Cho added. And no country in the world is gonna let us keep a dragon on their soil without wanting to know details, Holahawk says. I hate to say it, but we may have to terminate him, Genus admits with a somber tone. Izuku looked down at the table, tightening his fists as tears well up in his eyes as he says back, I hate to say it, but you may be right. Not really, Holahawk interjects. All eyes fall on the smiling woman as Egon asks her, you have an idea, Hollyhock? She nods and tells the group, more of a working theory. You remember when you gave me a piece of the singularity soul? What? Hatsum suddenly exclaimed, making everyone look at him. You gave her a piece of it but are foraying me, he complained. Egon slaps his face and tells him, Hollyhock has her head screwed on right and doesn't want to make a death ray with it. But why can't I make a death ray? He whines like a child. Because I say so, Egon yells at him, causing the man to sit down with a sulk. After calming himself down and pushing back his hair, Egon turns back and says, Continue, Pam. Well, I took a small sample from the piece and I managed to make a little something I like to call the reset bomb, she explained to them. Reset bomb? What's that? Egon and Izuku say at the same time. She then pulls out a folder and opens up to a picture of something strange looking. It appears like a small machine on the verge of breaking to pieces but held up and enraptured by vibes, roots, leaves, and other plant life with a glow at the center that illuminates like a flame. When this little device hits any soil, it will instantly shoot back up an entire forest of indigenous plant life, almost like if humans never cultivated it, she explained to the group, making Izuku's and Egon drop their jaws. If I can make one big enough, tweak it a bit, and send it to the bottom of the ocean, I could potentially make an island that the dragon could live on alongside any other animals or plants that can't be brought into the public, and we can bring ourselves to terminate or keep, she explained her idea. Egon shoots up from his seat and exclaimed, Hollyhock, you're beautiful. She then took a saddened and serious time as she told him, Don't thank me yet. There's just one problem with it. Everyone looks at her confused by the comment, until she tells them, I have no idea how or where to test it. Egon slumps back in his seat, deep in thought as he thought aloud. That is a good point. Where in all of Japan could we use the reset bomb? As everyone was pondering on how to remedy this problem, a thought struck Izuku, and he pronounced, I think I have just the thing. Later, you know, Izuku, I'll be honest, I didn't think you meant here of all places, Egon told Izuku through the built-in speaker on his high-concentration radiation suite. Seriously, where were you expecting? Izuku asked back through his suite, as he and Hollyhock set up what looked like a giant mechanical slingshot. Izuku set the machine into place as the woman punched in coordinates on a device connected to it. Egon shrugged and then irritated said back rhetorically, I don't know? One of the several illegal logging sites in Japan. Just not Hokkaido, he stressed while motioning to the dead zone a few yards away from them. Dead trees, poisonous soil, and cracked ground that looked dry and mucky were just a few of the wasteland sites starched out before the once prosperous northern part of Japan that was once a hub for new and improved nuclear energy. But that's why it's perfect. If the reset bomb can turn an environment back to before it was inhabited, then testing to see if it can destroy radioactive isotopes is just what we need, Izuku exclaimed in excitement. I have to agree with him. It's genius, Hollyhock agreed. Pam, I'm trying to be the voice of reason here. This place is a second cornerbill. The isotopes here are so powerful that, even with cleanup, this place will be unsafe for the next 3,000 years, he exclaimed in a half-yell, getting two sets of vastly different reactions to his outburst, making the man deflate as he told them, You'd better hope this reset bomb is as powerful as you say it is. After this, the coordinates were locked on and each reset bomb was primed and ready. Egon had the pleasure of launching them and ended up laughing like a child the whole time, much to the amusement of the other scientists. Izuku looks at a screen he was holding and said, All right, all 12 have been deployed. Egon lay on the ground of the large flatbed vehicle they were riding on. He was out of breath from laughing and said with a red flush face, "Gotta say, launching highly dangerous eco-bombs from a high-tech slingshot is tons of fun." Eventually, he got up and after calming down he asked, "How long till they take effect?" "They should start as soon as they hit the soil," Hollyhock answered. "Ah, Professor," Izuku called, making Egon walk up to him as the team continued. "The isotopes have gone down." "Already? How far down?" he asked as he looks over his shoulder at the isotope reader in his hand. His eyes went wide as it read virtually nothing, and asked while snatching the device and poking at it, "Is this thing broken?" "No. This is it," Izuku affirmed. Soon the three scientists were brought to the attention of a very strange sound. They looked out into the distance and saw all the plant life begin to resurrect from this rotten poisonous death. All around and far into the distance, they saw trees and flowers sprout and bloom up in huge groves and thick canopies. With eyes wide and isotope reader dropped, Egon could only whisper, "Oh, my gods," before spreading his arms and proclaiming, "It worked, it worked. It worked." The man began to jump around for joy as Izuku hugged Hollyhock and told her, "Your invention did it, Pamela." Pamela couldn't help but smile and look on at her work. But before they could continue, Izuku suddenly exclaimed, "Wait." The two scientists look at the teen as he asks the woman, "Do you have more?" "Even more later." "And that does it. The entirety of Hokkaido is now radioactive free," Izuku told the scientist as he looked at his screen map of the subsection of Japan and the isotope reader. All around them a sea of new plant life and no harmful radiation. With no fear of mutation from radiation poisoning, they took off their suits and tossed them to the side as they breathed in the new air of a long-gone place. And a new forest is growing on top of all of it. "At least that means there's plenty of building material," Egon said in a chipper tone while picking some wild fruit off one of the trees. "Hollyhock, I hope you're proud. You just reopened an entire region of Japan for those who lost their home." Izuku congratulated the woman. "I'm happy to have done my part for the community," Hollyhock says with a smile, at feeling the plants around her sing her praises for giving them back life. "That's all well and good, but I suggest we beat feet out of here before the government catches wind of the fact their cesspool of catastrophe is now safe for human life," Egon told them while packaging the fruit and jumping in the driver's seat. Hollyhock took up the passenger side and Izuku in the back as the tall man kicked their flatbed into a four-wheeler drive to go over the newly roughed-out terrain. As they drive out of the forest, Hollyhock spoke to Egon and asked him, "That brings up something I didn't get a chance at the meeting. What are we gonna do when our body of government overlords catches wind of what we're doing, and you know they will? Well, set up a meeting, establish ground rules, then go public. And from there, we'll be able to do more stuff," Izuku assured her. "Like making a new island for one dragon," she commented back while raising an eyebrow. Izuku smiled with a thumbs up and answered, "That's the plan." CH-32, Big Brother or Sister. Back in Japan at the national diet where the Prime Minister presided, an elderly, yet stern-looking woman was sitting at a table and eating a large Japanese-style breakfast while watching the news on her phone while skimming through the political section of a newspaper. Suddenly her large office doors were slammed open and a young man with a worm and ragged look burst in while running at top speed as he breathlessly ran to her. "Prime Minister! Prime Minister! Important news!" the man practically yelled, a panicked look in his eyes. Not even dazed by this scene, the woman continues to eat and read while saying nonchalantly, "What is it, Ryu? I'm in the middle of breakfast." It's Hokkaido," he tells her in a hurried tone. "It's a nuclear wasteland, Ryu." "What about it?" she says while looking down at her paper to roll her eyes as she chants his channel on her phone. "It's not," he says vaguely. Confused and shocked, the Prime Minister puts down her paper to look at the young man and ask him, "What?" Taking a deep breath, the man explained, "The science department just came with a report of the isotope levels in Hokkaido suddenly dropping. It is safe for human habitation again." He placed a folder on the table and opened it up. The Prime Minister took the folder and looked over the files within. After skimming through everything, her face growing ever more shocked, she finally put them down, took a sip of tea, and crossed her bony fingers in thought. "I don't believe it. How did this happen?" she asked in a soft voice. It may have something to do with the dense forest that has sprouted up. Overnight, Ryu offered. The Prime Minister snapped her old head towards him and shooting him a look she stated, "Really? Are you going off on an ecological miracle for an answer?" He shrugged then counter-offered, "Well, we also think that it may have to do with this place." Saying that, he flipped through a few more pages in the folder which brought up information about the Neo-Icon Phoenix Research Facility, a picture of it, alongside a pic of Egon and Izuku. Narrowing her eyes at the photos, she said without looking up, "Call them up and set up a meeting." When Egon got a call from the Prime Minister of Japan herself, seeking an audience, he was unsurprised but still nervous. Sure, he expected it to happen at some point and even very soon, but he couldn't hold his feelings. So he and Izuku get ready for the day that she comes, even though they didn't have to get ready, since they'd been prepping for it in advance. So it was all a matter of refresher and figuring out what to say. So the day comes and the two scientists find themselves in their meeting room with the head of government in Japan, an elderly lady who has shown years of experience and experience shit. Gray hair, wrinkles, yet sharp eyes, and an even sharper grimace. She was a force to be reckoned with. However, they had the ball in their court. So there they sat and drank tea in silence for the first few minutes. "So, Madam Prime Minister, enjoying your tea?" Egon inquired as she said nothing. In return, drumming his fingers to give off the sense he was nervous, he followed up, "I was wondering when you'd call. I suppose late is better than never." She took another sip of her tea before saying, "After your most recent achievement and many others hidden in the DAC, your laboratory was brought to the forefront of my attention. Well, we did save Hokkaido and you billions in cleanup. Now all that money can go towards rebuilding." Izuku argued back. Sending him a hard glare, she retorted, "I didn't come to thank you for that or talk to a child." Egon clenched his crossed hands at the comment and, trying to keep his cool, calmly told her, "With all due respect, madam, he is the whole reason that NIP exists. Without him, Hokkaido would still be a wasteland. So I suggest you respect him for that much at the very least. He may be young, but even I have to admit he's far smarter than me." The Prime Minister looked between the man and the tree before sighing and saying, "Very well." She then waved for one of her guards and they brought out a huge stack of papers and 2 pens where she told them, "Now onto the topic of business. Sign here and dash dot." No, we won't be doing anything like that, madam." Izuku quickly shut her down, making her glare harshly at him. "I beg your pardon," she asked back with a calm, sharp tone. "No offense, but NIP will not be one of your lap dogs held under your thumb and many restrictions," Izuku explained to her. Egon chimed in and added, "Without even a single bit of help from any government funding or inclusion, we were able to build this place from the ground up and won't be needing it now." She narrows her eyes at the men while tightening her hands around the pens and tells them, "I hope you realize what you are doing is illegal." Both men resist the urge to laugh while Egon informs her, "We have plenty of certifications, notarized and accepted by the government with your seal of approval," a fact that makes the Prime Minister scowl at herself. "While I admit we were trespassing on government property, it was also uninhabitable and we made it habitable," Egon argues back nicely. The Prime Minister opens up her mouth to argue back with him, but Izuku cuts her off as politely as he can and tells her, "Madam Prime Minister, let's just stop you right there. We're not going to budge unless you want to go in circles all day. And if you want to do a protracted court battle, I can give you the cards of the 17 law firms we hired." He then gets a text on his phone, reads it, widens his eyes, and corrects himself. "Oh, sorry, now it's at 21 law firms." The Prime Minister takes a very long drawn-out breath, and after calming herself down, taking the same neutral stern expression, she asks them, "What do you want?" Then the 2 men smile at seeing her surrender and Egon tells her, "In essence, we just want to be left alone. However, in return for this, you'll be the first to know about every invention, weapon, or creature we make here and have first dibs on it, even before the public knows of it. If you want to buy it, then buy as much or little as you want. Sounds good?" She raised an eyebrow and asks back, "So you want to be secretive and have open trade? Sounds rather suspicious. I won't know everything you're doing and for what reasons." "We all have secrets, madam." Us with NIP and you with Hokkaido, Egon says, with a knowing hum in his voice that makes the woman try her best to hide any expression. The man then continued and told her, as for our reasons, it is for the good of humankind and science. We have no ill intent. And even if we did, we are not at a state where we can easily defend ourselves against you. The Prime Minister closes her eyes and sits there in deep thought for a while, after which she takes her tea glass, finishes it up, and after smacking her lips she tells them, very well, you men have a deal. CH-33, going public. A few days later, an entire crowd of reporters was standing around a mobile stage and podium with a microphone. The stage was set in front of the entryway of NIP, as they had heard this newly constructed research facility had a grand announcement to make to the wider public. The moment this was heard by any news outlet, people from all over Japan flocked to this one lone building in the middle of the city. Izuku and Egon stood within the building looking out into the sea of reporters, eagerly awaiting the announcement. The both of them were in their best suits, available, and had practiced and rehearsed what they would say and do for this very day. Egon clapped his hand on the teen's shoulder and smiled at the boy as he saw him become very nervous. Izuku took a breath and smiled back at him, showing he was ready. And so the two of them walked out of the building and to the stage, where the hungry reporters began to shout questions and flash their cameras. Egon strifed up the mic and started off saying, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the press." The crowd exploded into a strike of questions and flashing cameras as Egon exclaimed, "Please, please, keep quiet." The crowd went quiet enough for him to talk, and he continued saying, "Now I understand that you're all very excited and have many questions. We will get to that after the announcement we have for you. Now before we begin, my name is Professor Egon Cristello, owner and head researcher of the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility, or NIP4. Short. I will now allow NIP's Vice President, Dr. Midoriya, to take over." Egon stood off to the side as Izuku came to the mic, arched it down towards him, and cleared his throat while starting with, "Hello everyone, as the professor has told you, I am Dr. Izuku Midoriya, Vice President of NIP and second head researcher." Yet again the whole crowd exploded the same way it did for Egon, and Izuku also had to be firm in exclaiming, "Please hold on to all the questions I know you'll ask until after we've finished." Yet again they went quite enough for him to speak, and he continued after calming down internally, "Now then, I'm sure most of you have heard of our facilities attacked by the League of Villains no more than a week or so ago. Well, you'll be happy to know that we were able to handle that dire situation far better than we expected and have come out even stronger from it. Now I'm also sure you're wondering why we here have decided to go public despite being up and running for over 4 months. Well, it's because we're trying to get ourselves set up and stable. Our original plan was to go public much earlier until the aforementioned villain attacked, but I'd like to call it a blessing in disguise since we have far more defenses and security measures than before. If ever we are attacked again, then I truly pray for whoever is brave or dumb enough to do it," he explained to the crowd. After adjusting his overly tight tie, he said, "Now getting to why I'm sure a few of you are here. You must be wondering what exactly it is we do here and dash dot." He fell off as he noticed a woman in the front row holding her hand up for the duration she was there, and Izuku said to her, "Lady in the font, you've had your hand up for the last 5 minutes and I'm getting tired from looking at it, so please ask your question. Is it true that your facility does not have any form of government funding? And is it true that you've refused it when offered?" The woman asked after putting her hand down. "Yes," he answered, simply making the crowd ask even more questions, to which Izuku shut down. "Please hold your questions." Once they went quiet again, he sighs and continues from where he was before, getting back on track. "I'm sure you're wondering what it is we do here. Well, we have discovered a new form of energy that can be used in a plethora of ways, but the main application is for it to absorb a select type of material it is constantly soaking in and then reproduce said material. This energy source we have dubbed soul energy is placed into a special crystal that then becomes what we have dubbed a splinter." As he explained all this, he took out an empty splinter from his coat pocket and presented it to the crowd, who started to take pictures by the dozen. He put the splinter away and explained, "From here we use several methods to turn the blank energy source into something already existing or mix and match Soul energy can even be used by itself and causes a wide range of effects. And if you don't believe me, then how about I show you all one of our most successful and accident experiments? At this point, Egon had vanished from sight to bring out their main attraction, an A. Few seconds later the glass entryway opened up like huge doors as a huge hairy animal stomped through before the awestruck crowd. Noticing the ever-growing shadow behind him, he introduced, "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, meet Gammoth." Gammoth, with Egon on her back, stood on her back legs and trumpeted out loud, as if to show off to the crowd. They asked no questions but began to shoot as many pictures as possible of the previously extinct animal. As they all awed before the huge creature, Izuku slyly added, "Now with everything said, we will now be taking questions." Just as he planned, the majority of the crowd was solely focused on the mammoth, and so only a select few people asked questions. The first one was an ordinary man who asked, "How did you do this?" "The elephant, I mean. Trade secret," Izuku answered. The next was a woman with a bird face who asked, "Was UA shown the wonders you created?" They were and were given a waiver to not say anything until it has gone public. So you'll see them bragging online about Gammoth and what she did during the attack, Izuku explained. After that was another woman who was colored gold and inquired, "What are your intentions with such vast and seemingly limitless technology? Aren't you afraid villains and other groups will try to get their hands on it? That's why we've been preparing before going public. As for our intentions, it's for the good of mankind and the pursuit of knowledge," Izuku told her. "What are your quirks?" a man with a bird nest on his head asked. Hearing this, Egon slid down Gammoth as she ate off some of the decorative plants, and taking the MIC he answered firmly, "That's not necessary information. Next question." But Izuku stopped him, grabbing at his sleeve and telling him in a low tone, "Egon, it's okay." Egon saw his assured smile, so he backed off and let Izuku speak, telling the person, "Professor Egon's quirk is used in the production of the splinters. My quirk is more silent, unseen, and not very useful. If anything, my intelligence is my quirk." The next person to ask was a strange man in a hoodie that covered his face as he shoved his hands in his pockets. "Why is someone like you in a position like this?" he asked in a vague, yet sinister tone. Not realizing how he was spoken to, Izuku informed him, "I realize I'm very young for being a vice president, let alone a doctor, but I can assure you that I dash dot. Not that." The man cut him off. Confused, Izuku inquires, "I'm sorry. Then what did you mean? How can someone who's quirkless get such a position?" he calls in a loud tone, causing nearly the whole crowd of reporters to stop taking pictures of the mammoth and look between him and Izuku, who now had his mouth dropped open. In shock, taking a dry gulp, he tried to ask back, "Wait, how did you dash?" But the man angrily cut him off and proclaimed while inching his way up the stage to the podium, "You're nothing. You and the rest of your kind are nothing. You should have gone extinct long ago. This world belongs to us." Egon pulled Izuku behind him, took the MIC, and yelled at him threateningly, "Okay, mister, that's quite enough. I don't know who you think you are, but you are done." Guards dash. Egon tried to have him removed, but the man suddenly pulled out a gun from his hoodie, pointing it at Izuku, who was peeking out from behind Egon, and shouted, "Quirk supremacy, you scum." The crowd screamed and began to panic. Egon covered Izuku in his body and waited for the gun to go off, but never did as he heard the man suddenly scream. The two scientists looked back over to where the man was and saw him dangling by his leg, high above the ground in the trunk of a very angry Gammoth. The man tried to fire his gun on the animal, but she has enough experience with firearms to know what would happen, so she slammed him on the ground twice, causing him to lose his weapon. Feeling relief and calming down, Egon vexed him, saying, "Did you seriously forget about the mammoth not even 10 feet away from us? On second thought, don't answer that." Gammoth then slammed the man down again before throwing him at one of the newly planted willow trees. What he didn't know was that these were the new snatching willows, and quickly found himself wrapped up in its many long leafy branches, all tried up and ready to be taken by law enforcement. CH-34, a new home. "Okay, drop the package." Izuku spoke over a radio as he, Egon, and Hollyhock oversaw the dropping of the tweaked reset bomb, now called the Island Bloom, on a boat in the ocean. Egon and Hollyhock watched as the boy stood unsteady on the ship, despite it not rocking at all, and rubbing the newly formed dark rings under his eyes as he yawned. The two adults look at one another and Hollyhock motions with her eyes. He nods and walks over to the boy. He jumps when the man places a hand on his shoulder and turns around with eyes full of adrenaline like a surprised animal. Izuku, are you sure you're okay to be out here? Egon asks in concern. Izuku bushes off his hand, waves him off, and replies nonchalantly, don't worry. Egon, we've taken every precaution possible. We're thousands of nautical miles from any sort of continent and hundreds from a human-inhabited island. Sure, the reset bomb is much bigger than the last, but we're over 100 nautical miles from it and pointed in the opposite direction, so if it does get bigger than anticipated, we can easily move out of the way. We're literally in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's not what he's referring to, sugar, and you know it, Hollyhock interjected. With a firm tone, Egon breathed and tells him, Izuku, you nearly got killed by some quirk enthusiast. Your mother was crying while holding you for hours as police and heroes investigated the whole thing. It was such a big scandal that every news station is covering it. Not very well, I might add. Hollyhock rolls her eyes at remembering how a few news outlets reported on it. Aren't you in any way affected by this? What are you feeling? Egon adds, looking at him with worry and fear. Izuku looks off the side of the boat, his gaze distant as he replies, unconvincingly. I feel fine, just fine. Better to get back in the saddle than let the horse run off on you. You didn't have an equestrian accident. You almost died. Egon exploded, making Izuku jump and look like a frightened rabbit. Egon calms down, breaths deep, and tells him, Izuku, I'm just worried about you. Most people would be freaking out or trying to hide away after such an event. But not you. Izuku thinks it over, shrugs, laughs, and tells him, I guess I'm just built differently. I gotta keep an eye on these readings. 1 minute before sea bottom. Impact. Egon and Hollyhock walked out of earshot as Izuku had his eyes glued to the tracking screen. Once on the other end of the ship, Hollyhock stressed to him, Egon, I'm worried about him. Egon nods while putting his hand on his cheek and saying, I'm stressed. Me too. Pam. That kid went through a whole lot before I found him. I thought that by redirecting his interests and energy I would be able to help him. But I'm not sure if that's helped completely. Hollyhock sighs as she looks over at him and says, we all have to keep an eye on him. I think that the villain's attack might have changed something in him. Egon nods and replies, I think so too. Ah, Professor, Izuku suddenly calls, making Egon walk over to him where he tells him, the island bloom has reached the sea floor and is quickly expanding up and out. That's great to hear. That means it's we're dash dot. Egon tried to say congratulations before he was cut off. I said it was expanding out, Izuku stated with more firmness and exaggeration. Egon raised an eyebrow and says back, I heard you the first time, Izuku. Expanding out and fast. We gotta go, he yells at the man while grabbing him by the collar. Surprised and then aback by his sudden and rough actions, Egon pulls him off and assures him saying, go? Izuku, we're over 100 nautical miles from the drop point, so we should be perfectly safe. The island should be no bigger than 75 to 89 miles wide or long dash dot. But before he could continue, something forces him to look off the boat. Before his eyes he saw an ever-growing and expanding land mass coming towards them. Egon panics and yells, holy shit. Punch it, Captain. Punch it. The captain sees what he's yelling about, panics himself, and kicks the boat up into the fastest gear possible. The boat rocked hard and the scientists on board had to hold on for dear life to keep from being thrown off. The boat pushed through the waves as fast as it could, but with its size, that was easier said than done. So eventually the rapidly growing island catches up and swallows them up. The boat makes landfall and crashes into the forming land, causing everyone to black out. After some time, Izuku wakes up from his blackout session and sits up from the cold deck of the boat to rub his throbbing head. He looked around, seeing darkness, and assumed he was dreaming, still blacked out, or his vision hadn't returned yet. Oh God, my head. What happened last night? He asks himself before remembering what happened and shooting his eyes open to look around. From there he tried to find his friends but can't, so he calls out to them in a panic. Egon, Hollyhock, Captain. Where are you? He yells with increasing volume on each name, becoming more and more terrified. Right here. Egon's voice calls out as he pulls himself out from one of the cabins. Man, that was a ride, Hollyhock complained as she pulled herself out from some boxes. Once Egon pulls himself up and out of a cabin, he helps the other two. From there, he cracks his back and tries to look over the boat to see where they are, but doesn't see anything. Just black darkness. Had they been unconscious until the middle of the night? Then his nose picks up on two things, dirt and pollen. He looks up and sees bits of light peeking out from something covering them. Then he realizes that they aren't at sea but underneath the canopy of a thick forest. Eventually, the other two realize this and look out with him as he stares in wonder. You hair, wow, is all Egon can say. I think it was far bigger than 89 miles there, Professor, Hollyhock says in a snarky tone. Egon raised a finger to her and says firmly, don't even start, Pam. My boat. You brainiacs owe me, the captain, who burst out from the control deck, yells at them. Realizing what their experiment did, Egon assured him, don't worry, we can easily compensate you. So does that mean we can transport Torchwick? Izuku asks. Egon looks around at the new environment, seeing it still grow in several smaller parts, and tells him, I'd say we should wait for this place to ripen a bit before doing anything. For now, let's try and get back to the mainland. CH-35, Memar. One day at NIP, Egon barges into Izuku's office and calls out in a chipper tone. You who? Izuku. You. He trails off at seeing the teen hunched over his computer and typing away at lightning fast speeds. Here. He falls off while seeing the number of papers, notes, coffee cups, and other things strewn about in a mess. He gets closer to the boy and says in a careful tone, Izuku. Without looking up from his typing, Izuku replied in a monotone voice, Hey, Professor. Egon just stared at him for a while before trying to break the ice by saying, You sure are hard at work, and, how long have you been working? Dunno, Izuku replied with a small shrug, still not taking his eyes off the screen. Egon felt his phone vibrate, and taking it out he saw a text. Looking it over he said, to the inventive teen, Your mom just sent me a text saying that you didn't return home yesterday. Izuku said nothing, thinking he did hear him. He asked a bit louder in concern, Have you been here all night? Still did not reply, so he just yelled, Izuku. Not sure, he answered casually, only stopping to drink out of the now empty coffee cup. Egon narrowed his eyes, put his hands on his hips, and exclaimed, Okay, that's it. He then took his young ward by the hand, yanked him out of his seat, and stated in a serious tone, You and I are going out for lunch and fresh air. It took the teen a bit to realize what was happening, but when he did he tried to fight back in vain to get back to his computer. What ha? No, I still have tons of things to do, he argued as he tried to reach out for it. Don't care. You need a break, he exclaimed as he marched past the front desk. Throwing off their lab coats, he said to his front desk lady, Megan, we're going out to lunch. Have a good lunch, sirs, Megan said while waving them off. Later, Egon and Izuku now sat at an outdoor seating for a restaurant with an American theme. Sitting at a table closest to the street at the front of the establishment, Egon chowed down on a huge burger that was twice the size of his head, though he seemed to be taking it all in with ease. After wiping his face of hot cheese, he stated with zeal, Man, I love these things. They have the most authentic American food in all of Japan. However, he was the only one enjoying his food as Izuku sat there and stared at it with a blank and somber expression. Taking a long sip of his soda, Egon asked him, Izuku, you haven't even touched your mega meat gut punch burger. You can't tell me you're not hungry. You've been on a liquid diet of caffeine since yesterday. Izuku's gaze was still distant, his face somber and pale with the dark rings under his eyes looking darker and heavier than the last time. Whether this was from a lack of sleep or nutrition was up for debate. He just looked sick, tired. Something was wrong, and Izuku was no good at lying. I'm just thinking, he replied in a distant voice. Anything you want to talk about? Egon asked while putting his food down and giving him his full attention. No, he said with a slow head shake, making Egon look away in concern. Only for the boy to suddenly perk up as he yelled, Shit. Surprised by this and looking around in a frenzy, Egon asked, What? He then followed Izuku's eyes and saw a small group of students from UA and more, specifically Class 1A, walking towards them. Shit, Egon cursed with him. They're coming this way. What if they see us? Izuku exclaimed in a panic, while pulling on his face. They won't, Egon assured him firmly and took out a splinter from his pocket. Activating the blue-colored crystal, it shone a light around them that when died down seemed to do nothing at first. Looking at himself, Izuku noticed that where Egon sat was now an old man in his 80s. When he looked down at himself he noticed he was in some kind of black and white goth outfit and was given some attachments. Completely dumbfounded by what was happening, Izuku babbled, "What is dash?" Appearance-changing splinter. Just don't act like yourself, Egon quickly answered in his normal voice. Izuku did as he was told, took out his phone, and pretended to look at it. Just then, the small group of UA students walked by the restaurant where they were eating. The group consists of Mina, Kirishima, Kaminare, Zero, and Bakugo. They didn't pay the disguised scientist any mind until something caught Kirishima's attention. The redhead stopped and looked over at the scientist, and more specifically, their food. With eyes wide and mouth dripping with saliva, he asked with an excited glitter, "Whoa, that's the biggest burger I've ever seen. Hey old guy, where'd you get that?" "The restaurant right behind me. But I'm afraid they will stop making them at this time. You'll have to come earlier or on the weekend, but only on Saturday," Egon put on a fake old man's voice while thumbing to the restaurant behind him. Kirishima snapped his fingers and complained, "Ah, man. Well, thanks anyway, old guy." As he left, Kainare said to him, "Bro, did you see that goth chick? Super hot." "Yeah, but she was with that old dude," Kirishima told him, thinking up something nasty. Kaminare waved him off and stated, "Maybe that's her grandpa." Luckily for them, and Izuku most of all, throughout that whole interaction, Bakugo took no notice of them even once. Once they were out of sight, Egon took out the splinter again and turned it off. With a sigh, Egon heaved and offered, "That was too close. Maybe we should wrap up and eat back at the lab," to which Izuku readily agreed. So the scientist packed up their oversized food, left money on the table, and walked back toward the laboratory. On their way to it, Izuku, despite his distant glare, noticed something strange and brought it to his walking partner's attention. "Hey, Egon," the man hummed a reply as he told him, "There's a lady following us." Egon took a peek behind them and saw a very ragged, dirty, thin, and seemingly unhinged lady walking behind them a few yards away. She looked worse for wear, and almost ghost-like, but Egon tried to assure him, "You sure she isn't going in the same direction?" After several minutes of walking and the same lady still following them, now just a few feet away, he finally admitted, "Okay, she's following us." "What do we do?" Izuku asked in concern. Egon scanned the area around him for some kind of outlet, and when he did he cleverly pointed it out and told him, "We're nearly at the lab. Once we reach that corner we run like hell." Izuku nods. Walking calmly, they resisted the urge to just boot at that very moment, even when they were only feet away from the corner. Once there they ran like hell, and didn't dare look back. Luckily for them, they didn't have to run very far since it was only a few blocks away. So their run was quick and they made it through the front entry in record time. "Hi Megan, by Megan we're back," Egon said quickly to the woman. "Welcome back," she replied, confused. From there the two of them ran into Egon's office where he threw the food bags on his desk and locked his door, for extra safety, before finally relaxing and breathing heavily due to their lack of exercise. "Made it," Izuku said breathlessly. "What a creepy old hag," Egon huffed between words with a hard shiver. Suddenly they were both startled by the office phone ringing, and Egon quickly picked it up with his normal voice, answering, "Yes, Megan. So there's a woman here who wants to see you. Says she knows you," the woman told him on the other end. Izuku's eyes went wide at hearing this, and he mouthed, "You don't think?" Egon shrugged and asked her, "What does she look like?" "Old, desperate, ragged." Megan listed off. Egon rolled his eyes and stated, "I meant her description, not your opinion. Old, dirty, crazy gray eyes, thin as a twig, blonde hair, basically looks like a crackhead." She listed off more in depth. Egon deflated and told Izuku, "Yep, it's that woman." "What does she want?" "You're not gonna see her, are you?" Izuku stressed to him in concern. Egon thought for a bit, then speaking to both his employees he instructs them. Keep the silent panic alarm ready, and bring the spider web splinter. Megan hangs up and Izuku nods while going to the secret wall compartment to pull out the needed splinter and kept it close to him. Once ready, they both walked out of the office and back to the front entryway. They hadn't even gotten halfway into the room when the strange woman saw Egon and kept at him. "Honey," she cried out. Egon freaked for a moment, then activated his quirk and kept her at bay with the sharp ends of his crystals while yelling, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. Back off, lady. I don't know who you think you are, but you'd better keep away." The woman looked hurt by his rejection and she told him, "What are you talking about? It's me. It's me." Everyone was confused by this statement, most of all Egon, who replied, "You realize that it's me only works over the phone, right? If you're trying to be a scammer, you'd better try a different angle." Now she looked insulted by his accusation and stated, "What? No, I'm not a scammer. It's me, your mother." "What?" Izuku and Megan shouted in unison. "What?" Egon asked back with narrowed eyes, clearly not believing her. "Lady, just how dumb do you think I am? My mother is dead," he firmly stated. She then took an irritated disposition and roll-over eyes she said, "Oh, is that what your father told you? Guess I can't blame him for how we broke things off. But I'm your mother. I gave birth to you." Suddenly something clicked in Egon's head and he said, "Oh, wait a minute. Now, I know you." The woman smiles at this, only to be shot down when he followed up by saying, "You're that evil witch my dad would always gripe about." Her face twisted in anger as she yelled, "Evil witch? The nerve of that man. Out to give him a piece of my mind. In fact, where is he? I'll go to him now." "Try the cemetery," he offered while thumbing out the door. "The what?" she asked back in anger and shock. "Yeah, he's been dead for well over a year. Him and my mom," Egon informs. "I keep telling you that I'm your mother," the woman exclaimed, clearly annoyed. "With him." Egon rolls his eyes at the claim and tells her, "No, you're not. Naomi was my mother. She died with my father in the same accident." The woman raises her eyebrows, which are nearly gone, and asked, "Naomi? Who the hell is that?" Egon sighs in irritation and explains, "My stepmother. She and my dad married when I was about 6 and she's been my mom from then until she died. Do I have to keep talking about my dead parents to you? I'm gonna cry." She takes a minute to process all this and then says aloud, "So, Rich is gone." Egon, clearly upset by this, half yelled, "Yes, how many times do I have to tell you? Rich?" Izuku inquired, noting it wasn't a normal Japanese name. "My dad was half American," Egon quickly explained. The woman then huffed, crossed her arms, and grit her teeth while saying to herself, "Well, this seriously puts a wrench in my plans." "Plan," Egon repeated the word. Not realizing she said it aloud, she had no choice, so explained to him, "I was gonna get back together with your dad and be your mom again." Egon's eyes shot open as a smile exploded on his face and he laughed. "What? Ha 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 ha. Stop laughing. What's so funny?" she demanded. After laughing for a bit, he calmed down and told her, That's what. Even if my dad was still alive, he'd never get back with you." The woman took a snarky look and placing her hands on her hips while flicking her scrappy hair she retorted, "I wouldn't be so sure. I know my way around a man's heart." Egon shivered at the display and commented, "More like around a man's pants." She quickly drops the sexy act and goes back to being angry and entitled while yelling, "Excuse you. How dare you speak to me like that? I am your mother and you will treat me as such." Egon glared harshly at her and tells back, "How dare I? How dare you suddenly come out of the gods know where and try to input yourself back into my life like nothing happened? I just met you like 2 minutes ago and you expect me to treat you with any decency, courtesy, or respect, especially after what you did. Get real." Confused by this topic with zero context, Izuku carefully asked, "What did she do?" Egon laughed dryly and stated with an angry, crazed look, "Oh, where do I start?" The woman rolled her eyes and stated nonchalantly, "Oh, come on, that all happened such a long time ago. And it sent ripples that are felt today," he yelled back while spreading his arms. The moment you found out what my dad's quirk was and what he did for work. You left me, took his money, and ran like thunder, he accused her, making Megan softly whistle and Izuku looks away uncomfortably. She growled back and argued, "It's your dad's fault for lying to me in the first place. If it weren't for that, none of this would have happened." Confused by her statement, Izuku once again inquired, "His quirk?" "My dad was quirkless," Egon told him simply. From this statement, a light shit in his head, and Izuku finally realized he had the answer to a whole host of questions he had in the back of his mind. He looked at the man and realized that of all the things he thought up, he now knew that the man who helped him so much ended up knowing more about what it was like to be him, from second-hand experience. As Izuku was in mindless thought, Egon continued his argument and half yelled, "And sure, I don't agree with him lying to you like that, but he was young and the quirkless aren't given the time of day or treated like dirt. And he may have lied about his job and title, but he didn't do so about his salary." That still didn't make it any better. She pouted in response while looking away. Seeing her reaction, Egon clutched his hands and exclaimed in a rant, "And if stealing from him wasn't bad enough, you tried to throw me away the moment I was born. Like literally threw me in the trash like garbage. And don't even try to say you didn't. My dad has proof and I still have it. You could have left me at my dad's place or put me up for adoption. But no. What kind of sick animal would do such a thing?" The woman appeared to surrender as she sighed and slumped her shoulders while asking in a coy cutesy tone, "Okay, I admit I was wrong for that, but can't you forgive me?" Egon repressed the urge to moan in aggravation, so instead he inquired, "By the way, Dad told me that when you ran out on him, you ditched him for some meathead with a better quirk, as you called it. What happened to him?" Her face immediately shifts from cutesy to irritation, and she says in a pissed-off voice, "Oh, him? Don't even make me remember that jerk. He was lazy, leching, lying, good for nothing." Egon put on a fake expression of worry as he vexed her. "Or D's. Then why'd you leave him? Sounds like you two were a perfect pair. I'm sure you made a great couple." She growled while rolling her eyes and telling him off. "Oh, don't even joke about that. Things were okay for the first few years until I had my second son and dashed." Before she could continue, Egon stopped her and exclaimed, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Pump the brakes. I have a half-brother." She looked confused by him focusing on that part, but shrugged and told him, "I guess, but he was such a pain, and even worse than his father. He got into so much trouble and eventually became a villain. My last straw was when I got a call from the police. So I left him and my son for good to find you again. And here I am. Aren't you happy?" she asked while batting her eyelashes and putting out her lower lip. On anyone else, this might look cute, but on a meth head that looks like her, it was just disturbing. No one in the room tried to hide the intense disgust on their faces, which is when Megan asked, "Is she high?" The woman immediately turned back into a Karen and demanded, "Excuse you? No, she's right. Are you? 'Cause you can't be serious. If you are, then let me spell it out for you. I'm not happy you're here. I don't want you to be here. I don't want you in my life. I just met you and I already hate you. I can finally see why my dad would badmouth you all the time. I'm sure the only reason you're here, besides your second screwed up family life, is because you heard I made it big and wanted a slice of that pie, right?" Egon accuses her. You just want my money. Not me, right?" Egon asks again, getting closer to her. Well, you can forget it. I don't care what situation you're in. Go crawl back to whatever hole you slinked out of and continue to stay out of my life like you have for the past 30 years. You're not my mother and you never have been. So get lost," he shouted into her face before turning around to leave. But she didn't leave. She stood there for a moment with her eyes down and covered over in her gaudy hair while clenching her hands. "You brat," she yelled while jumping onto his back from behind and attacking him with her fists and nails. "Give me money. Give me money. Right now. I deserve it. You owe me. Be useful to me," she demanded while screaming like a banshee. "Get off, you crazy hag," Egon yelled while trying to fend her off. Megan panicked and froze in place at this. But Izuku did and sprang into action. Jumping on her back and ripping her off, Egon yelled, "Get off the professor, you crazy lady." But she screamed loudly and harshly while suddenly getting a strange burst of strength and ripping Izuku off her and screaming, "Get off me, you quirkless runt." Izuku was thrown against a wall where he was nearly knocked unconscious. She shivered in disgust and yelled, "How dare you touch me? I'm calling the police." But she never got the chance to pull her phone from her workout jeans as Egon saw red. He quickly grabbed one of the small decorative planter pillars and used it. Like a bat. The last thing she saw was Egon's furious expression before being hit so hard she flew to the opposite end of the room. Egon breathed hard while dropping the decor and commented, "Call that bitch." Sometime later the police had been called and detained the woman. She was shoved into a cop car, but not without yelling and making wild demands before finally being driven away. Meanwhile, Egon spoke to another officer about everything that had happened. The officer had a sober expression on his face as he had been there the last time when the laboratory was invaded. After penciling down the last bit of information, the officer told him in an apologetic tone, "I'm sorry that you've experienced even more trouble at your facility, Professor." Egon waved off his apology and assures him, "There's no need to apologize, officer. Compared to what we've been through before, this wasn't so bad. And to be fair, I kinda let it happen when I should have turned her away at the door." He tips up the brim of his hat and tells the scientist, "Well, I'm kinda glad you didn't. She has several warrants for her arrest in several parts of Japan. You've done us a service." "Gold I could help," Egon dryly chuckled. Just before the lawman left, Egon stopped him and inquired, "Oh, one more thing before you go. Could you look into something for me?" The officer raised an eyebrow and replied, "That depends if it's within my reach of power. She had another son some time ago, my half-brother." He turned to villainy. "Could you find out who he is and where he is?" he explained to him. Again the officer raised an eyebrow and asked him, "Couldn't you do that yourself? You have the resources and tech." "I'm a scientist, not a PI," Egon shoots back. The officer laughs dryly and tells him, "Fair enough. I'll see what I can do, but I make no promises." Egon nods and thanked the man before going over to where Izuku was being tended by a doctor for his injuries. Kneeling he asks, "How are you holding up?" Izuku rubs the sore spot on his head and says with a dry laugh, "A bit sore, but I'm fine." Egon sighs as he sits next to him and asks, "Remember what we talked about?" "Don't know. We talk about a lot of things," Izuku says back with a dry laugh. Egon shoots him a look and reminds him, "About you taking unnecessary risks." Izuku looks away in shame and tells him apologetically, "I'm sorry, I just couldn't help it. I saw you in danger and I blanked. I just acted." Egon sighed then ruffles his hair while telling him, "You are a good kid, Izuku. You just have a fuzzy head with a good heart." Izuku smiles a bit until Egon firmly grasps his head, turning it to him as he tells him in a serious tone, "But don't make stuff like that a habit. I can protect myself." Izuku soberly nods in reply, his gaze growing distant once again. CH36, Confessions. "Good morning, Megan," Inko said in a cheerful voice as she strolled into the front entry of the facility. "Ah, Inko. Good morning, I'll call the professor and your son," the woman said to her as she punched in the numbers of both offices. A few minutes later, and only Egon showed up at the front entryway. Seeing the woman he greeted, "Inko, what a surprise. What brings you here?" "Just dropping off some lunch and snacks," she told him while placing 2 bento boxes and a box of assorted donuts in his arms. Looking at the lunches he commented in surprise, "Geez, Izuku must be a big eater. If you packed him 2 bento boxes." Inko waved off the interpretation and told him, "Oh, don't be silly. One's for Izuku, and the other is for you." Egon was shocked by the gesture and told her in a baffled tone, "For me? Wow. Inko, I don't know what to say. Thank you." She smiles at the thanks and motioning to the donuts she says, "I also bought some donuts for your staff. I couldn't make bento boxes for all of them," she told him with a sweat drop, a tired look on her face, showing it took a lot to make just the 2. Seeing this he reassured her and replied, "I'm sure they'd be happy. Thank you." Again, Inko looks around the area and asks, "Where's Izuku?" "Held up in his office," Egon answered while giving the donuts to Megan to bring to the other staff. "Keeping him busy?" she asks suspiciously. Keeping himself busy, Egon huffs with an eye roll. Surprised by this, she then said with pride, "He must be your most diligent employee." "Too diligent if you ask me," Egon commented on his head, knowing how hard he was pushing himself. Egon wondered if he should tell Inko about what was going on, but has no idea how to bring it up. He wondered if she noticed or if Izuku had even told her a thing. He knows he should, he just has to find the right time. However, as he was deep in thought, he couldn't help but notice a few things about Inko as she stood there. She had a new scent on her, maybe a new perfume or shampoo. His hair was more shiny than usual, and the way she would move it almost looked as if sparkles were being shed. Then he faces her full cheeks, her full glossy lips, and her dazzling eyes. She was beautiful today. But then again, she was beautiful no matter when he saw her. Then Inko spoke, and she shook him out of his daydreaming as she said, "Well, tell him I was here and that I love him. Keep up the good work." "Sure thing, and thank you," Egon replied a bit quickly, mentally disciplining himself for it. Sometime later, when he was finally having lunch, Egon was shocked and amazed by the meal Inko had prepared for him. It was so cute, with the carrots and tomatoes cut into little flowers, the rice balls were shaped like pandas, and the sausages were cut like octopus, the noodles were so soft, and the tempura was grilled to perfect. He wondered if Izuku got the same thing or if they both got a similar one. He'd find out later. Though before he could chow down, a familiar woman burst through his office and yelled, "OMG." Nearly falling off his seat and saving the bento, Egon breathed down his racing gear and exclaimed, "Honey Lemon, for the love of the gods, don't do that." But the woman ignored him as she patted into his desk as he jokingly asked in a dry tone, "Now what's gotten you so excited? Did you finally discover espresso?" "You like Inko," she said with warning, pointing a finger at him. Before he could wonder where she got that idea, his face grew red, and his mind went blank as he argued quickly, "What? No. That's crazy talk. I don't like." "Huh. I mean, I do like her, but not in the way you're thinking." This just made he smile wider at him as he tried to calm down and collected his thoughts. "I just admire and respect her as a person and capable woman who raises and provides for a son all on her own. She's a visionary." "Yeah," he stated boldly as Honey Lemon just continued to stand there and stared at him with the same overly excited smile. His sweat dropped and inquired, "You're not believing a word I'm saying?" "Nope," she shook her head. Seeing no way out of this, he sighed in exasperation and admitted, "Okay, fine. You got me. I may have feelings for her." Before Honey Lemon could squeak like a fan girl, Egon stopped her and stated, "But leave it right there, Honey Lemon. She is called Mrs. Midoriya. Mrs. She's married, and I'm not going to degrade myself by going after a married woman." "Have you ever seen her husband?" Honey Lemon asked him back. He rolled his eyes and then explained, "He works overseas. The American dollar is very high over here. And that's not an excuse." She shrugged and offered, "Well, why not just tell her to get it off your chest? I can tell it's been eating away at you." Egon opened his mouth to argue, then he stopped as he thought it over. He slumped into his seat as Honey Lemon watered his reactions until he turned around in his chair and told her, "Leave me to my own business, Honey Lemon." She giggles and tells him, "Whatever you say. Just think about what I told you." For the next few days, Egon does think about it a lot, and it didn't help that Inko came almost every day with a fresh bento for both him and Izuku. Finally, after letting his thought and emotions eat at him to the point he couldn't work, he confronted this just as Inko left after dropping off lunch. "Inko, wait," Egon called out as he practically bounded down the front steps of the entry. Once catching up to the worried woman, he said, "There's something I have to tell you." She quirked an eyebrow, and the first thing to leave Egon's mouth was, "A boo-da-boo-da-bee dabby dipple dibbly." Egon continued to babble out more incoherent nonsense until Inko went from intrigued to frightened. She backed away and said, "What dash? Egon, you're starting to scare me." Egon held his breath till he was red in the face and let it all out in one raspberry. Before asking her, "If I do that again, I want you to slap me." Inko nods in concern, and Egon tries again. Gobble gibble go dash. This time Inko quickly smacks his face and stops his chicken scratch talk. He runs his face and says, "Thank you. As I was trying to say, there is something I have to confess to you. Something that has been on my mind for a long time." "What is it?" she asks him, intrigued once more. Egon rubs the back of his head as his face begins to burn up, then finally admits. Inko, I have feelings for you. But I know you are a married woman and that it can't work out between us. I just wanted to get it off my chest and not make things too awkward between us in the future. I'll drop it right here and now, he says, while letting out a breath. Egon. Inko starts before grabbing both his hands, surprising him as she tells him, flattered. Truly I am. I never could guess someone like you would fancy a woman like me. Egon was enamored by her, but only for a moment. When he realized what she was doing, he ripped his hands away and exclaimed, Inko, what are you doing? Have you forgotten your marriage? That's the thing, Inko says while looking down, drawing out the suspense in his heart before following up. I'm not. Egon's eyes go wide and he asks in confusion, what? But you and your son have told me your husband lives and works in America to provide for you. And your maiden name isn't Midoriya. I'm so confused. She sighs as she walks over to the steps to sit down, with Egon right beside her. Where then she tells him with shame, that was a lie. Well, partly. My husband lives and works in America, but not for the reason I told you or my son. Egon raised his eyebrow, now even more curious, watching as the woman gripped her hands as tears welled up in her eyes as she admits, it's to stay as far away from us as possible. What? Why? Egon shamelessly asks her. After wiping her eyes, she explained to him, when Izuku turned 4 and we found out he was quirkless, my husband . She fell off her story until Egon filled it in for her and said, was shunned by his family for it, put in for a transfer, divorced you and had given up all custody, and is now paying you monthly child support from a world away. How did you ? She tried to ask, surprised by the accuracy of his guess. He chuckled dryly while rubbing his head and looking down as he admitted, my father was in many situations like that throughout his whole life. And Izuku doesn't. No, does he? Inko shook her head sadly and replied, he's already been through so much. I couldn't bring myself to tell him his father abandoned him. She takes out some tissues from her purse and wipes her face once more before taking a shaky breath and telling him, I'm not proud of myself for lying, but I know it was the best thing for him at the time. The two of them sit in silence for a while until Egon inquired, is it still the best thing for him? It's been so long and I'm not entirely sure, Inko admitted while calming herself down and telling the man, but getting back to what we were talking about, I'm flattered you want to be with me, but I'm not sure you're making the right decision. Confused by her statement, Egon prompted her further and asked, what? What do you mean by that? She stands up quickly, nearly making Egon jump as she motions between Egon and herself, stating, come on, Egon. You are a tall, young, handsome man with a successful business, while I'm just a 40-year-old, short, chubby, divorced woman with a son. Oh, Inko, please don't threaten me with a good time, Egon begged her as he shut his eyes with trembling fingers, a cold shiver and a trail of blood going down his nose, making Inko blush beet red. After focusing himself and cleaning away the blood, Egon told her, look, I don't care about how you look or whatever notions there are about you. I like you for you. He took her hands and continued saying, when I first saw you it was like watching an exploding supernova. So beautiful and terrifying that I couldn't take my eyes away from it. Inko raised an eyebrow and asked back, you were terrified of me. When we first met you were 2 seconds from calling the police on me, thinking I was a pedo. Egon drowned out. That makes more sense. Inko's sweat dropped, remembering their first meeting. But I'll be honest, Egon, I haven't been on the dating scene in a long time. She admitted in shame. That's great to hear because I've never been on it before, Egon readily admitted. Back. Inko shuffled on her feet and asked him, do you think we can take things slow? Perhaps start with coffee and work our way from there. Egon's mind went black for a moment as his head overheated with a plume of smoke coming off his head as he said in a stuttered hurry, why yeah. Sure. I'm just fine with that. Then I'll give you a call when I'm free, she tells him with a small wink before walking away. Sounds great. See you then, Egon says to her while waving by. Once she was out of sight, Egon began to make a string of strange sounds and movements before falling to his knees and melting into the ground as he prayed to the sky, thank you gods in heaven. Meanwhile in the building, Honey Lemon clapped hands with Megan as the two Watched the whole scene with binoculars as the other Morgan triplets alongside Cho, Cluck, and Otto all exchanged money for their bets. CH-37, Research Log, Update. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting from the *** my office. Anyway, lot has happened here at the laboratory and *** man, I need more coffee. I thought it would be best to report on it. So going in no order, as I've already stated. In another log, probably, we were attacked when the League of the Leagues of, I don't know. Some villains came in when UA came for a trip of some kind. And we weren't prepared. Everyone got out alive, except the villains. And we killed the giant monster they brought to kill All Might. It was a whole mess. We carved up the monster, found out a bunch of stuff, and, yeah. Oh, one other thing, we found some sort of thing on the monster's body. A calling card or signature of the person who made it. Going by DKG, and now we're trying to figure out what it meant, but it's not much to work off of. Anyhow, after that, we went on a full-scale modeling of this place, and now it's 10 times more secure than before. We have turrets on the roof, new types of plants out front for hidden defenses, an anti-warp quirk generator, defense animals, silent alarms, super locks, sound-based weapons, chemical traps, railguns, wall spikes, and just about anything you can think of. At this rate, even if we get broken into, they'll be in for a whole world of hurt. Hankoyo is even trying to develop a sound-based force field. Hatsum even perfected his robot designs for all the grunt work and even a small armada of droids used for fighting a small army. He's even started production on a few special ones he called the assassin droids. Robots have far more human flexibility and lethality with the downside of very little defense, but he is having trouble since recreating the human body in a machine is very difficult. Once things were set up, everyone was allowed to go back to their own devices and continue on their previous projects. I personally haven't had the time to do any, since I've been busy with stuff and things and giving pointers or helping out with other projects and developments. I really do want to work on my stuff, but I always find myself helping someone else or writing down notes on an idea I have, and then expanding upon it. Then it becomes too much and I give it to the rest of the team to see if they want it. After that, we then set a meeting on the problem with Torchwick. In short, his gotten way bigger, way faster than any of us thought. We discussed termination. But in the end, it was Professor Holohawk who gave us an alternative. She made something called a reset bomb, a small device the size of a really big watermelon, covered in flora and highly unstable, using a piece of the original Singularity Soul. In short, when this thing hits any area, it'll cause a massive and sudden growth of indigenous plant life. After which we tested it in the fallout zone of Hokkaido, and it worked. It worked. So well, we decided to completely scrub clean the radiative zone, and now it's safe for rehabilitation. Of course, this caught the attention of the government and they called for a meeting with us. We had prepared for this kind of event and things went better than expected. Then we decided to go public and things didn't go so well. During my speech, a quirk enthusiast tried to kill me but failed to do so. For some reason, he found out I was quirkless. I have no idea how, but he did. I have a hunch it wasn't a coincidence, but the gunman isn't so keen on talking to the police. It was really scary. It was like looking at KK Bakugu again, and this time he was out for blood and more. After this, Holohawk made a new reset bomb that was modified. It looked about the same but was far larger, around the size of a small car with a larger fragment of the Singularity Soul inside. This one was dubbed the Island Bloom, and as the name suggests, it causes an island to form in an open space of water. If we had used a normal reset bomb to do this, then we would have just made a really big coral reef, which could be used to revive the coral reefs around the world. We were supposed to throw Torchwick on there the moment it sprang up, but Egon said we shouldn't, as he noticed, even hours later, that the new island is still developing, so it needs to ripen, as he says. It should be ready in a week or so. But I hope it's sooner because Torchwick is already getting to be the size of Gammoth. As for the island itself, it is quite possibly one of the most geographically marvelous places in the current world. It has so many different biomes in just 4,000 miles. There's a deciduous and evergreen forest, a jungle, a savanna, a desert, a swamp, a wetland, a high mountain with snow, a volcano with active lava flow, and some more I can't remember. From all this, we decided to name it. Atlantis was immediately out since it wasn't located in the Atlantic Ocean. So instead we decided to name it Pacifica after the Pacific Ocean. Anyway, back to what I was saying. What was I saying before? I forgot. Where should I go from here? Oh, I know. I'll report on what everyone made in the time. That this place became more fortified. First is Cho, who I already stated before how she outfitted the facility with far more dangerous methods. She's even starting to make a laser gun with Dr. Cluck. Then there's Hatsum who, as I already said, is making new and improved robots. Honey Lemon has produced a whole host of different materials from several chemical compounds, such as super adhesive concrete for buildings, an instant air cushion for people who attempt to jump from high places such as suicide and trapped on top of burning buildings, and even a super dissolvent to speed up demolition. She's even been working closely with Anima on creating a new form of bacteria that eats inorganic matter like plastics, glass, and metal. We actually finished that one and have managed to purchase Takoba Municipal Park Beach for experimentation. Hankyo has figured out how to turn a splinter that is primarily positively or negatively charged into a base. I'll spare the details, but it doesn't seem to have any effect in causing evolution or quirks and just gives off the radiation that allows for extra energy given when in proximity of a living being. When we turned it into a quirk splinter, we found out that it was far more powerful than before. A normal quirk splinter will allow a person to utilize around 40 to 50% of a person's copied quirk, but this one allows the use of 80 to 95%. So we've decided to scrap all the current quirk splinters we have and make new ones. Luckily, through the intervention of Dr. Cluck, we now have a foolproof method and machine for producing them in mass stock. What took me months of work to do can now be done within only a few hours. As of now, we've completely remade, restocked, and now making new splinters by the dozen. This gave me so many ideas that I've given to Cluck, and now she's going absolutely bonker with it. Which in hindsight wasn't the best idea. Pamela has been restocking the greenhouse since the last attack and is the main reason the outside of the facility is so easily concealed. She made a willow tree that grabs anything that gets too close. A tree that appears dead at first glance but, when agitated, will reveal a horrifying face that can produce a paralyzing gas and throw homing fruits that can latch on with sharp teeth and explode after a few minutes. Another tree, which I can't remember, makes flowers of different colors that have different effects. Several defense cacti and bushes, a rose plant that can cause extreme and uncontrolled aggression, grass that trunks into blades, shrieking flowers, and so much more. Unfortunately, many of the plants she made have been deemed too unsafe to be controlled without her, so they have either been discontinued, destroyed, or are to be sent off to Pacifica. Speaking of the island, Egon has given Anima full reign to do with it as he pleases. Since it's an island with no indigenous life, it's a blank slate for anyone to create a whole new ecology. You can imagine how he took that. By that I mean he fainted. Otto was pretty excited too. He has so many new animals he can put on the island, as both a way to keep it at balance and protect it alongside the killer plants that will be placed on it. As of right now, the only creatures that will inhabit it in the near future will be Torchwick alongside a horde of dodos and the evolved sheep, being used as food for him. We found out quite recently that the new dodos I made months ago have an extremely quick life cycle. After an egg is laid, the chick will hatch in 24 hours and then mature into a full-grown adult in a week. How Pete has lived for so long is beyond me. But thanks to this we will be able to breed and cultivate more dodo meat to be sold. Anyhow, before this news was given to the creature division, Professor Genus had discovered and proved the aquatic ape theory by testing some of the evolution splinters with a whole host of different primates and subjecting them to environmental stimuli. He was able to create a living mermaid. Currently, a small pod consisting of a dozen are swimming in a large pool in the facility. But since we don't have the heart to kill them, they too will be sent off to Pacifica with another new aquatic species. Genus also decided to look into the terrestrial fish theory and ended up creating sirens from a group of lungfish. I have the description of both creatures, but I think something is wrong with my eyes. I can see the paper. I think I'm gonna end it here. End of whatever. Izuku turned off the mic and put the papers he was holding down on the table. He rubbed his eyes and tried to look at them, but no matter what distance he looked at it, short or long, he just couldn't make them out. What was happening to him? He felt his stomach twist into painful knots that nearly made him double over in pain and threw up into a nearby trash can. He tried to sit back up in his chair but found his limbs so weak that he couldn't even pull himself up. He tried to look at the computer screen but only saw a fuzzy light. His head began to spin and the sound of his heartbeat began to block out all noise. At that moment the only thing he could rationalize was that he just needed more coffee. So he stood up with all his might in legs that felt like they were stung with needles and made of jelly. He looked over to the other side of the desk where he saw his half-finished coffee. He tried to walk over to it, one arm on the desk and the other stretched out to try and grab it. But the few feet felt like yards and waves of pain, and nausea hit him with even a slight movement until he looked up and saw the room spinning. He saw everything and nothing at the same time, and then blacked out. That's where Honey Lemon found him, on the floor of his office and sprawled out, with his face pale as a sheet. Then altered the rest of the facility when she screamed. CH-38, the truth. After a long and white dream filled with nothing, Izuku opened his heavy eyes to another white room. He knew it to be one of the hospital rooms set up in the NIP, Facility for Medical Use or Emergencies. He could only guess he was that emergency, even with such a foggy mind. He looked around and saw a person half asleep in a chair next to him. He immediately knew who this was and with a weak voice called, Professor. Izuku. Egon shot up from his half-sleep while embracing him tightly. While on the edge of tears, he said, "Oh, thank the gods you're awake. I almost thought you had slipped into a coma." What happened? Izuku asked him in a weary tone. Pulling away and wiping his face, Egon asked back firmly, "What do you remember?" Izuku took a few minutes to think it over, then told him, "I was in my office, doing a lot of updates. I felt sick, and then nothing." He looked over to Egon with an expression crossed between confusion and desperation, as if pleading with his eyes, trying to ask what happened. "Izuku, you had a serious medical emergency," Egon told him after taking a deep breath and continued to tell him, "I'm not sure how to describe it, but you had a burnout, and a bad one at that." A loud honk was heard as if to agree with his statement, and Izuku looked down at the foot of his bed to see Pete nesting there. He then turned back to the professor, and almost trying to make a joke of it, he asked, "Was it that bad?" With a deep and somber expression, Egon explains to him, "Izuku, your heart rate, blood sugar levels, and pulse were off the chart. Your body was under so much stress we thought you had brain damage, not to mention the lack of sleep and nutrition in your bloodstream. It was mostly caffeine." He then looked off to the side, biting his fingers before telling him, "Izuku, you nearly died." Then Izuku noticed something he hadn't done before. He initially chalked it up to just walking up after a dead sleep, but now he saw how blurry his vision was. So he asked, "What's wrong with my eyes? You look so fuzzy. You put so much stress on your brain and eyes that you ended up messing up your vision permanently," Egon told him in a serious voice. He then went to his coat, where a new pair of glasses had been made for him. Unfortunately, they weren't there, and just before he could start looking around, he heard Pete start to choke. The dodo coughed loud and violently before finally regurgitating up the glasses. Egon sighs and swipes the spectacles before the bird could attempt to eat them. Again, after shaking and wiping them off clean, he put them on the teen's face while telling him, "We found your prescription while you were out and made a pair for when you woke up." When Izuku's eyes adjusted to the new frames, everything looked like it did before. As he looked around the clear room, he instantly took notice of the state Egon was in. So ragged and worn out with bloodshot eyes, like he hadn't slept for days. A light beard dusted his face. Izuku didn't even know he could grow facial hair. He just looked bad. Even Pete looked worse for wear in comparison to how he normally looks. After taking everything in, he asked, "How long was I out for?" Egon raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is that seriously what you are focusing on?" Izuku made no counter, so Egon huffed and told him begrudgingly, "You were out for a few days." "A few days?" Izuku yelled while suddenly getting a burst of energy and trying to spring out from the hospital bed while yelling, "I have to dash." Pete honks in fright and jumps off the bed only to hide right under it. But Egon caught him by pinning him under his body and exclaimed, "Oh no, you don't." Trying to restrain the wiggly teen, he yelled, "You are not leaving this hospital bed until you are 100% again. No exceptions." "No, I have to," Izuku argued. "I said no exceptions," Egon yelled back. "No, I have to. Let me go. I have to go back to work." Izuku attempted to struggle even harder, making the heart rate monitor go crazy. Nearly freaking out by this, Egon pulled a syringe from his pocket and proclaimed, "That's it." He then stuck the needle into the teen's neck and pushed the plunger, making the teen cry out at first before suddenly falling into a slump and calming down. "Sorry, kid, but you left me no choice," Egon apologizes while getting off of him. As Egon resituated Izuku in his bed, the teen immediately realized the man used a sensitivity on him. As he felt the effects of the drug set in fast, he still attempted to fight back and tried to exclaim, "But I have to." "No, you don't," Egon yelled at him as he lay there. Egon then fell into his chair beside him, clutching his hair and breathing out a stressed breath as he asked in a fearful tone, "Izuku, why are you doing this? Why are you hurting yourself so much? Did you not hear the part where you nearly died?" "But," Izuku tried to argue. Egon whipped his head to him and exclaimed in a half yell with an expression of fear and pleading, "But what, Izuku? What? What excuse could you possibly have for hurting yourself like this?" Izuku said nothing in return and Egon turned away. As he told him, "I tried to help you and did. All of us did. But we didn't want to push the issue in case you regressed more. We wanted you to come to us." He then took a shaky breath, balancing on the edges of crying as he said, "Now I see. That was a mistake." Izuku saw all this and couldn't help the hard pinning in his heart. He had done all this himself. He didn't want to, but he did. He hurt one of the few people who cared about him most. Speaking of such, "Izuku," Inko yelled as she burst into the room. Looking up weakly from his bed, Izuku asked, "Mom?" Inko immediately wrapped the teen in a hug and sobbed as she said, "Oh, baby. Yes, it's me. I'm here." As Inko cried into her son and Izuku lay there with tears welling up, Egon looked on and thought to himself. After a bit he interjected and asked, "Inko, can I talk to you?" Inko got off her son, looked at the man, nodded, and wiped her tears away. After assuring her son she'd be back, she stepped into the hallway with the tall man, where he stated, "Inko, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have been more strict with him, but I was trying to be too gentle and now he's here." Inko shook her head as she watched him drop his head in shame and assured him, "Don't be ridiculous, Egon. It's not your fault. You never once hid your concerns about Izuku from me and kept me updated. If anything, it's mine. Once again I proved to be an incompetent mother and allowed something terrible to happen to my son." Egon chuckled dryly at seeing her put the blame solely on herself and said while taking her hands, "Then I guess we both share the blame." Inko leaned her head on his chest and asked, "Why did he do this to himself?" Egon sighs and tells her, "That's what I was interrogating him about." "Then let me help," she offered him, to which he agreed. The two of them then walked into the room where she started off saying, "Izuku," but the boy looked away as if knowing where the conversation would lead, and Inko told him, "Please, look at me." But he refused and Inko tried a bit more firmly, "I need to know. You need to tell your mother why you did this, please." "I'm fine." Izuku finally babbles out something, still averting eye contact. At this point, Egon's blood pressure shoots up and he puts on the bad cop motif as he yells, "No, you're not. You're lucky to be alive after the stunt you pulled on your body." "Egon," Inko scolded him. "Inko, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this for him. The sooner we get to the source, the sooner we can nip it in the bud," Egon argues back. "I told you I'm fine," Izuku says a bit louder while looking at them. Inko shakes her head and asserts with tears, "Izuku, you're not." But Izuku looks away again and Ikeo says, "Then in that case." She turns to Egon and tells him, "Egon, I don't want you to allow Izuku any access to his office or any work, even after he's healed up." Egon doesn't miss a beat to agree to her demand and Izuku, still weak and pale as a baby horse, tries to rustle himself from his sheets as he exclaims as much as he could, "What? You can't do that. Inko looks at him sternly through her watery eyes and tells him, you may be working and have a salary, but you're still a child and my son. The dam finally breaks and Izuku tells with as much gusto as he could, and with thick tears he shouts, fine. I need to do this to make up for it. Make up, Inko repeats. For what? Egon asks. For my failures. Izuku finally admits as tears start to fall freely from his face. After sniffling back his emotions he explained, I couldn't be a hero, I became. Repulsed with the idea of it, but I've never forgotten it. Both Inko and Egon's eyes grew wide at this as he continued, if I couldn't be a hero then I'd help them to make up for it. So that's what you were gonna say when we first opened this place, Egon says to himself in remembrance. After sobbing a bit he continues to tell them, I thought it would be easy, but then, the villains, and that quirkiest, and Bakugu, it made me realize I wasn't trying hard enough. So I worked harder and harder to make up for it. But I'm still so weak. At this, he finally breaks down and manages to roll over and into his pillow where he sobs his heart out. Shocked by the full disclosure from her son, Inko carefully seats herself beside her emotional son and asks him cautiously, Izuku, why didn't you tell me? Izuku calms himself down enough to speak and tells her, you don't make it easy for me to tell you. Inko is shocked by the revelation and can't bring herself to reply. While Egon what? His all this while leaning on the wall. After thinking everything over that his seen and heard, he says to the two Midoriyas, okay, I can see what's going on here. They both look at the unusually calm man as he tells them, it's apparent that this is going a little bit deeper than some unresolved self-issues, but an issue of trust and truth. And from what I can see, you two seriously need to talk about the secrets you are hiding. You're hiding a secret from me. They both ask one another before gasping. Egon gives a small inward sigh and tells them, I'll just leave the room and let you two talk. Once the scientist left the room with the dodo tucked under his arm, leaving the mother and son, they both stayed there in uncomfortable silence for way longer than they needed to. Neither of them was sure which would speak up first and about what, and if it even would be the truth. This goes on for several minutes and the tension grows thicker with each moment. Finally, Inko breaks and she asks, Izuku, why is it hard for you to talk to me about things? Izuku looks away and tells her, 'Cause I'm always so scared of how you'd react. You never take bad news well. It'd make me feel like it's my fault. Inko looks gasped at this and she asks in a small tone, have I been doing that? Izuku gives the smallest nod in return as Inko looks down at herself in shame and apologetically tells him, I'm so sorry about that. It was never my intention. I just have always been explosively emotional. They both go back into silence when Izuku refuses to speak back, so Inko continues and asks further, do you feel this way because of how I reacted when we found out about, you know? Again, another small nod. Her eyes welled up, and she said, I'm sorry, Izuku. I was so young back then, your father left, and I had no idea what to do or say. She wipes her face and gained control over her emotions as she admits, but Egon is right. There is something I've been keeping from you about your father. Izuku sighed as his mother trailed off and answered for her, he's not in America. For work. Just to avoid me. Shocked by his spot-on guess she stammered out, how did Dash? Izuku looked away as he explained, I kind of figured it out, and that you hid it from me because of what I was going through. Inko teared up once again and she told him in an apologetic tone, I'm sorry I lied. At the time I thought it was for your good. I understand. Thank you for telling me. I thought I'd have to bring it up, he told her as she leaned down to hug him and he tried his best to hug her back. After they broke away, he sighs stressed and says, I guess it's my turn. Izuku took another few minutes to collect himself and finally admit, do you remember how I would come home looking like a mess almost all the time? Inko nods and Izuku feels the fear run up his spine as he says, I was bullied relentlessly. I figured, Inko said back. Now it was Izuku's turn to be shocked as he asked back in a mix of confusion and hurt, you knew. Seeing what he was assuming of her, Inko told him, I tried to help. But that school had it out for you. I couldn't enroll you in any others cause they all denied. And we couldn't move due to my job and income. Izuku understood as he looked away and said, then added, but that's not all. Most If not all of my injuries that I got came from. He trailed off, a mix of emotions tightening his throat and chest until he could finally choke out. Bakugu. Inko was shocked as her mind raced with questions, but kept silent. As Izuku continues to unload on her. And worst of all, on the final day of middle school, he told me to kill myself. He finally admitted, a mix of a hot iron going through his chest and a huge weight of his chest hitting him like a wave. Inko was about to start bawling. She wanted to but didn't. She kept her emotions in check long enough for her to ask, "Why didn't you tell me?" When Izuku thought about this, he realized he had no idea why. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was being stupid. Maybe he thought he wouldn't be believed. Maybe because it's always hard to talk. So, for now, he just told her a half-truth. Auntie Mitsuki is your only friend. I didn't want you to destroy the only connection you had. That's why I kept quiet. You didn't actually. Inko trailed off, thinking back to what he said. I did. Izuku confirmed, making Inko gasp hard for air until he followed up by saying, there was more to it, like how I met All Might and he told me I couldn't be a hero. If it went for the flurry of emotions she felt, then she'd be elated for him, to meet the man he looks up to. But when she heard that, her heart sank. Izuku sniffles back and explains, but that was the day that Egon found me, saved me, and gave me a new path. He is my All Might, my hero, my light in all the darkness of my life. That's why I did what I did. So I could live up to him. Izuku began to cry again, thinking back to the day he was saved by no hero, but a normal man who was better than any hero out there. After calming down and his feeling of nostalgic gratitude faded away, he said, maybe I still want to be a hero. Maybe I want to be known and not invisible. Maybe I want some credit. Maybe, I don't know. Inko cupped her son's weeping and emotionally broken face, telling him with sweet words, Izuku, you've already done so much and are credited for so much more. You helped make this place, helped Yue during the attack, aided Egon in his initial research of the singularity soul, he corrected her. Inko's sweat dropped and continued saying, right, that. What I'm trying to say is, you've already become a hero in your own right. You don't have to live up to anyone apart from yourself. You are known for so many good reasons. And even if you weren't, you'd be known to me, Egon, and everyone else in the place you made. Suddenly Izuku felt the last burst of energy he'd felt for the whole day. He sat up and wrapped his mother in a tight hug, to which she hugged him back. The two Midoriyas shed silent tears on one another's shoulders as they held one another for longer than they knew. When they finally pulled away, cleaned themselves up, and calmed down, Izuku inquired, say, you're not hiding anything else from me, are you? Inko flushed red as she looked away while twiddling her fingers as she admitted, well, Egon and I are dating, so ... Wait, what? Izuku immediately questions. After the two of them disconnected, Inko left the room with a lot off her chest and much more to think about. She was glad to get out everything she withheld, but worried and thoughtful about what her son told her. Then she suddenly got a call on her phone, and without even looking at the caller ID, she answered it saying, hello. The voice of her best friend Mitsuki practically shouted through the phone as she exclaimed in excitement, Inko, long time no speaking. How have you been? Anyway, you'll never believe it. I got 2 tickets to ... Mitsuki. Inko cut her off. The somber tone she carries made the woman stop and ask, what is it? After breathing deeply with the memory of what Izuku told her, fresh in her mind, she told her, I think we shouldn't talk or see one another for a while. What ? Inko, what are you ? She tried to ask only for the phone line to go dead. Inko, Mitsuki shouted in a panic. Everything all right? Her husband, Masaru, asked as he poked his head into the kitchen. Mitsuki looked at the wall phone with a sad expression and said, Inko just said she didn't want to talk to me and hung up. Masaru came up behind, hugged her, kissed her head, and assured her, I'm sure Inko is just going through some stuff. Her son was in those 2 incidents. Maybe she just needs time to sort out her feelings and all that. Mitsuki hums and replies, I hope you're right. As Inko hung up the phone, her mind clouded with too many emotions to handle. Talking to her friend right away, Egon walked up to her with Pete under his arm. Hey, Inko. I wasn't pretending to come back here as soon as you were done speaking with Izuku, and I wasn't eavesdropping the whole time and dash dot, he began to tell her until Inko suddenly grabbed him by the collar, pulling him down to her level and passionately kissing him on the lips. Egon froze in place, his mind blank yet racing, his body still yet trembling, his breath caught yet heavy, his face hot and burning. Inko pulled away and told him in a grateful tone, "Thank you for saving my son." Egon said nothing in return. He could say anything, not even sounds. So he just sputtered, grew red, produced steam, and fell to the floor face first. There Inko looked surprised by his reaction, and Pete began to peck his head. After this, Izuku spent another 2 weeks recuperating in the hospital while being banned from working on anything else. It was nice for him, like a long due vacation, but without anything to do other than sleep, eat, and heal. The teen was put on a round of different medications for his stress and anxiety alongside weekly talks with a therapist and a family therapist for him and Inko. When he finally got out of the hospital area, his office had been moved closer to Egon's, and he would go to check up on him every so often to make sure he wasn't overworking. When he wasn't in or busy, a robot assistant would do that job. After about another 2 weeks, coming back into his work and new routine, Izuku showed signs of getting better, and he felt better too. For him, it was nice to finally admit everything he was holding back to the people he loved. It felt right to be open and vulnerable to them, knowing he would never be judged again. Now he felt happy, truly happy. CH39, new hires. One day at the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility, the whole building was flooded with the sound of incoherent screaming that lasted from the first thing in the morning till right this moment. Most everyone was able to power through it except for Cho, who looked like she was ready to rip someone's head off. Finally having enough, she charges out of her division wing and barrels through the hallway, following the yelling until she finds it at the break room, where she bursts through the door and yells louder than whoever was. "What's going on here? What's with all the yelling? Who is yelling? It's only 10 in the morning." She screamed so loud that the shouting stopped all at once upon the sight of the fuming woman. "They are," Hankoi, who was in the break room, pointed to Izuku and Egon, both of which were silently cowering from the homicidal-looking woman. Calming down from the confusion of seeing the two people in the facility with the strongest bond arguing, she could only babble back, "What the dash?" Izuku found out that Egon is dating his mom, Honey Lemon, who was also in the break room, explained with a giggle. Cho raised her eyebrows and asked, "It took him this long?" Now it was Izuku's turn to be surprised as he half yelled in shock, "You knew?" "Izuku." Egon tried to grab his attention. Izuku quickly connected the dots and exclaimed while pointing his finger, "You all knew?" "Izuku." Egon tries more firmly. Izuku whips his head back to the man and proclaims, "Don't you Izuku me? Why? Are you dating my mom?" "'Cause she's hot," Egon argues back. "Egon. She is. She's my mom. So, you're my employer. It's weird. It's only weird if you make it." "Egon," Izuku yells. "Izuku," Egon yelled. While the two of them bicker once more, Honey Lemon whispers to Hankoi, "I heard they've already gone out on several dates." "Oh," Hankoi cooed back in excitement at the gossip. "And get this," she exclaimed in a low tone while waving her hands, "I heard that. They've even been holding hands," she squeals. Gasp. "No," Hankoi says in fake playful surprise. "Fingers laced," she said in a squeaky tone. "How lewd," Hankoi comments while putting his finger to his mouth, his head tubes making weird cute sounds. "Doesn't that make babies?" Honey Lemon asks with a giggle. At this point, Cho has had enough for the whole day, so she shakes her head and leaves the break room, making a mental note to get headphones. Despite their low whispered tone, Izuku and Egon could hear them the whole time, and stopped their bickering to stare at them. After they finish and Cho leaves, Egon shouts at them, "Can you two stop being weeboos? You're scientists, for goodness sake, act like it." "Ahem," calls the loud voice of Morgan. "What?" The two scientists half yell at the woman. "If you two are done having a family squabble dash dot," she began only to be cut off. "Don't you dare marry my mom," Izuku demanded. Egon looked down at him and proclaimed, "Just for that, I'm gonna marry her. Sooner than planned." This struck a nerve in the boy and he quickly kicked the man, causing him to grab his leg and yell, "Oh, my shin." Since they were quietish, Morgan continued and informed them, "As I was saying, you two have several people who want to have an interview for a job. Are we still hiring?" Izuku asks her. "As it turns out, we never took the hiring page down on the website," she explained to him. "Or piss. So how many are there?" Egon asks between painful breaths and hopping on one leg. "About 6 in total, with 2 of them being a pair," she answered. "Let's split them between the 2 of us." Izuku offers and Egon nods, but not before stamping his shoe on Izuku's toes. A while later, Izuku was sitting in his office with the first interviewee sitting across from him. Unfortunately, he did expect her to be so big and ended up having to use 4 chairs just so she could sit comfortably. The woman in question was a very tall, fox-like woman with a curved figure. She has blonde hair that just reaches her shoulders, a single strand of which goes down the right side of her face. She has large blue eyes with bushy eyelashes and pointed ears, along with teal-green fur and a white furry underbelly. In terms of attire, she wears an orange buttoned-up shirt with yellow-orange buttons and pockets on both sides of her chest, as well as black pants with a yellow-orange belt. She wears a wristband of the same color on both of her arms, along with an orange headband that seems to resemble a pair of earmuffs. She also wears orange and cream-colored slip-on shoes. The 2 of them sat in silence for a long while after Izuku noticed something strange with her resume and called Egon to come to help him. But as time went on, it was apparent she was getting very nervous and anxious. So trying to calm her nerves, Izuku said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Futs-Josie." The woman pronounces her name. "Well, I'm sorry for making you wait for so long. The professor should have been here by now to assess your predicament," Izuku assures her as she nods back in affirmation. Suddenly the automatic door slid open, causing the 2 to jump at its suddenness. And in walks a very irritated Egon, covered head to foot in bubbles. After shaking himself off, he stomps inside and announces, "Sorry, I'm late, Izuku." Hatsune tried to weaponize Bubbles and turned the entire robotics division into a foam party. "Now what seems to be the holy MOLY," he exclaimed upon seeing the large woman. "Wow, you, my dear, are a whole lot of women," Egon commented, craning his head to meet her eyes. "Professor," Izuku scolded after seeing the woman uncomfortably blush and fidget. "What? People gawk at statues of naked people and pagan gods. I gawk at large women," Egon argues back. "Professor," Izuku yells at him. Fine. Sheesh." Egon finally concedes in a grown-up before taking his more professional mannerisms and saying to her, "Sorry about that. You're just a lot to take in all at once." "I get that a lot," Josie replies, her ears pointing down. Sitting next to Izuku, he says, "Now what seems to be this precarious predicament you're telling me about?" Izuku hands him her resume, and reading it over he understands what he meant and said aloud, "Oh, I see." After reading it over a bit, he puts it down and takes a more proper and professional stance and mannerisms as he tells her flatly, "Well, Ms. Josie, according to your resume, you have 0 work experience, 0 previous places of employment, and 0 skills for the job you're trying to get hired for. Can I just ask, why?" Suddenly she begins to tear up as she explains, "Please, I have no other choice. Due to my size and quirk, I'm not someone who is wanted for the workforce. No matter where I go." Josie puts her hands into her face and starts to weep bitterly in front of the 2 men, where Izuku gets up flailing and trying to calm her down, telling her, "Oh, crap. Don't cry. Don't cry. Please don't cry. Yeah, we don't need you making Izuku cry as well, then we'll have to brave the high seas." Egon chipped in a low snarky tone only Izuku could hear. The teen whipped around and yelled at him, "Professor, am I wrong?" he asks back with a teasing smile, making the boy blush in anger. Seeing things starting to unravel, Izuku takes charge and tells her with a firm tone, "Ms. Josie, due to your circumstances, we have decided to give you a chance." She stops crying at this news and smiles wide before Izuku tells her, "But don't be fooled by the title of secretary. It's not about sitting at a desk in cute clothes, clacking at a keyboard with finely manicured nails, making copies and coffee for your boss. It has a lot of challenges and most of all experience curves. Are you willing to do all you can to achieve the best outcome possible?" Josie sniffles back her tears and holds up her head while saying, Why yes. I am. Well then, you start tomorrow at 6 a.m. sharp. You'll be shadowing our head secretary, front desk lady, and organizer. They will teach you all you need to. Take over their jobs when need be, he tells her while holding out his hand. So elated by this, Josie grabs it and begins to shake it while exclaiming, I'll do my best. Unfortunately, she also didn't notice she was shaking him as well. She stops, letting him go and apologizing. After making vertigo go away, Izuku shakes his head, fixes his glasses, and tells, we will have to make arrangements for your size difference. Thank you, she says gratefully. Izuku turns back around to scold Egon but sees him standing there with a ridiculous open-mouth smile and holding 2 thumbs up. It then dawns on Izuku that his mentor merely did all that to test him. And apparently, he passed, but not to his pleasure. Sometime later, Izuku's office was once again beset by someone who was looking for a job. Only this time there were 2 of them like Morgan told them. A man and a woman, both of which were quite unique in both appearance and personality. The 2 of them appear very similar to one another in both appearance and age. Maybe they were siblings or something. They both had white hair, red eyes, tall, slim, yet toned physiques, and clothing that could only be described as old-fashioned ancient in terms of style yet still held the appearance of a scientist. The woman had glasses and the man had a strange pack on his back that fell into a tub on his strange goggles. Oh yeah, check it out. Ace Researcher Pura. The woman, Pura, exclaimed, while holding a rock-on sign by her head and winking. An Ace Researcher Robbie, he. The man, Robbie, exclaimed as he struck a pose. Abe shot his hand while pointing a finger into the air. Reporting for duty. They both stayed in unison. Izuku laughed dryly and said, You 2 sure are extravagant. So, why exactly do you 2 want to work here? And what do you have to bring to the table? I'm glad you asked, Vice President, Pura said as she took out a file from her bag, placing it before him as she offered. Have a look at this. It sure is thick. Izuku comments aloud while feeling the folder that looked ready to burst. It's the Cliff Notes, Robbie told him. Shooting his eyes open in shock, Izuku exclaimed, These are the Cliff Notes. I'd hate to see the whole thing. You see, Director, we are researchers in the field of ancient technology, Pura explained. Izuku narrows his eyes, no longer impressed by them as he cautiously asked, What like the pyramids were built by Dash? But Robbie cut him off as he strode around the room, bobbing as if he were dancing to a song, and told him, Yes, we all know that the pyramids were built by Hebrew slaves and not aliens. We're talking about something else. Now curious again, Izuku sat back to take it all in. Seeing this, Pura opened the file and flipped several pages to one part where she pointed out with her fan studies show that the sandstones used in the construction of these monumental tombs of kings were crafted and sent from the southwest part of Africa, and studies showed that they were far faster in their delivery than methods of that age. The only question that reminds me is, how? Before the woman could answer that question, Robbie jumped in and exclaimed, while pointing to the air, I'll tell you how. It's ancient technology, y'all. He. Izuku replied, sitting forward again as his curiosity turned back into caution. Still not convinced. How about this? Pura asked while tilting her head before explaining. Back when Genghis Khan was expanding his empire of the far west and north, recent studies have shown that he was able to take over towns, villages, and cities in a time much shorter than travel would be possible in these places. Not only that, reports translated from texts say that the Khan army appeared from nowhere and took them by surprise without any warning from scouts. So how did they cover so much land and take over so many civilizations in such a short time? So how, you may ask? Well, by Dash, Robbie tried to exclaim once more, only for Izuku to butt in and say, Ancient technology. Yes, I get it, Robbie. Izuku looks over all the notes for several minutes before taking off his glasses to run his eyes and tell them, to be fair, I had never thought of this before. Humans have been excavating resources from the earth for centuries. If at some point they found a vein of, then they could have. He trailed off while deep in thought, muttering to himself before changing the subject and asking, So why choose us of all places? When we saw you pull out and explain that splinter thing, we knew it just had to be connected. Pura answers affirmatively with a smile. So we dropped everything and came here looking for a job, Robbie added. Izuku turned around in his chair and thought this over before turning back to them, and saying with his hand out, well then, I guess you two are hired. Meanwhile, in Egon's office, he too was interviewing one or the groups of two that came in. Sitting across from him were two people so vastly different he didn't know such a pair could exist. The first was a toddler-sized human Araindo hybrid, with the left antler broken but braced at the base by a metal plate. He has a larger head and eyes and a less defined muzzle. He wears a large pale red-pink fuzzy top, hat with a sideways medical cross covered in a blue aviator cap, a blue backpack, an orange and white striped muscle shirt, and a maroon pair of shorts. The other person was an old woman who surprisingly didn't look a day close to 70. She stands tall and slim with a body that seems to be in her prime despite her wrinkled face. She wears an outfit made for someone much younger, which includes a navel ring, a shirt that bears her midriff, a purple blazer, and purple low-riding pants. She has a pair of small sunglasses that, when they are not over her eyes, she wears them on her forehead. Alongside that, she wears bracelets and rings on her left hand, with a hardened expression on her face. She looked like a real no-nonsense person. Looking over the papers, Egon asks them, so your names are Dr. Kurara and Dr. Tonitoni Chopper? Yes. That's right, but you can call me Doctrine, everyone does. Doctrine tell him in a gravely voice. And everyone calls me Chopper. Chopper added with a happy tone that held a nervous tick. Well, I certainly like what you two got going for you. This alone would guarantee you both spots in my facility, he tells them, making Chopper brighten until he followed up, though I have a question for you, Doctrine. The woman tilts her head as she adjusted the toothpick in her mouth. It says here that you have unorthodox methods. Can you explain? He inquires. Suddenly the woman gets up from her seat, walks up to Egon, and begins to poke and prod at him in all sorts of ways while saying, your temperature is 98.2 degrees, pulse is 86, blood pressure is 125/85, and BMI is 17.5. Shall I continue? After tasting an old lady out of his mouth, when she stuck her fingers in there for a temperature reading, he gets up and replies, please wait here. After Egon leaves and Doctrine sits back down with her feet propped up on the desk, Chopper comments, I think you scared him. She then whirls to him and punched him straight on the head while yelling, don't be stupid. Of course, I didn't. A few minutes later and Egon was in with a flabbergasted expression after getting his physical results, as he says, I don't believe it. Well, believe it, she said back to him as Egon gingerly put himself back into his chair. After this, he breathes a calming breath and asks her, there's also one other thing. It says here you've been practicing for over 80 years. Even if you got into medical school at 16, you'd be well over 120 years old. I am, she says flatly. You're what? He asks her again. 120 years old, she tells him nonchalantly, trying to freak out over the fact that one of the oldest living people was in his office. He then said while looking at the small animal person, changing the subject, Chopper, you are quite young to be a doctor. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The vice president happens to be the same age as you. With this news, Chopper beamed so brightly that Egon almost had to look away from him, but put a hand up to shield his eyes and push through as he continues, I just want to know what encouraged you to pursue such a career. I can tell it isn't the woman sitting beside you. With that comment, Egon has to quickly move his head out of the way from a very irritated Doctrine's flying toothpick. Chopper stops his beaming and becomes suspiciously quiet and reserved like he was having a flashback. After his somber expression turns to determination, he proclaimed, I want to find a cure for every disease in the world. Egon smiled and says, that's a wonderful dream. I hope that by working here you can achieve it. Chopper nods enthusiastically as Egon inputs, also I'm quite fascinated by your quirk. A mutation that makes you look like a reindeer and a small one at that. That's because he is, Doctrine interjected. Is what? Egon asks back. A reindeer, she says nonchalantly. Egon blinks several times, looking between her and Chopper until he points at him, and asks, intelligent animal. You got cotton shoved in your ears, she replied in an annoyed tone. After taking a moment to digest all of this, he tells the intelligent animal, well, Chopper, you'll be ecstatic to know that 2 of our other residents are also intelligent animals. Chopper once again beams at this news, but then Egon leans into him and whispered, but my advice to you, stay away from Dr. Cluck. Orpington, she's nuts. I heard that, you hairless monkey, Cluck shouted from behind his office door. Like I said, nuts. Egon egged on. The very last person to be interviewed was Izuku, who found himself with an old and strange-looking man sitting across from him with the biggest forced smile he'd ever seen. He was a strange short man who was already dressed like a scientist, with a lab coat button-up, a red tie, pants, and black shoes. He was bald with the only hair left on his head growing from the back and sides, which gave him 2 twin-tail bushels off the sides. A large nose and thick mustache-colored gray framed his face. Feeling suspicious rising, he asked the man, Dr. Albert W. Wiley, am I saying that right? Please, Dr. Wiley is fine, he tells him with a small wave, trying too hard to act friendly. I like what I see, but ... Izuku began until he was cut off. But? Wiley asked too quickly. Looking back down at the papers, he tells him, it says here you've been fired from several different laboratories in your career. I may be young, sir, but I know the red flags when I see one, he inquires while leaning in. The facade dropped and Wiley loudly proclaimed while pointing at him, it's not my fault, I swear. Narrowing his eyes while raising an eyebrow, he prompted him, go on. Wiley calmed down a bit and then explained, my old associate, Dr. Light, is to blame. I'll spare you the details. We butted heads on a lot of things, and in the end, he tried to ruin me multiple times. But I'm far more resourceful than he thinks. YA. Ha ha ha. After performing this little scene, Wiley froze up knowing he had done himself in. All while Izuku continues to bore holes into him with his suspicious glare. He knew right away this guy was bad news and he should probably just cut his losses and throw him out. But then he thought it over a little bit more and realized that this man could potentially be too dangerous or slippery to handle for anyone in the future if he got in with the wrong crowd. So the best option going forward would be to bring him on so he could watch him closely and have control over everything you did. As the saying goes, sometimes it's better to have the devil as your ally than to have him as your enemy. So rubbing his temples, he sighs deeply and tells the old man, tell you what, I'll give you a chance. But if I find out that what's been said is true, you can kiss your resourcefulness goodbye, he said in a firm, threatening tone while glaring daggers at him. Wiley adjusts his tie and gulps deeply while sweating and answering, I accept the terms of your agreement. CH40, dangerous experiment. And that concludes another productive day at the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility. Egon proclaimed that she locked up the front door of the facility one fateful night. Does he always monologue? Chopper asks while sweat dropping. Only when he's in a good mood, Morgana tells him with a small chuckle. Egon whips around with a huge smile and tells them, you're damn right I am. I've got a hot date with a little lady. I get it. You're dating my mom. Izuku yells in a groan while covering his ears. Egon huffs while pushing out his chest and stating, and I'm gonna keep saying it, until you stop complaining about it or asking me to stop dating her. This then caused the two to engage in a mini-argument about the topic, causing awkward energy to hang around the few employees who stayed late. However, the argument between the two owners stopped when a certain topic was broached. Hey, why are you bringing the mascot with you? Hankoyo asked as Pete was trying to snap at one of his head tubes. Egon quickly scoped the bird up and explained, he doesn't like being left alone. But we have dozens of them in the facility. Chopper states with confusion. He just likes people. Egon shrugs back. So you bring the brainless bird but not Otto or Cluck? Wiley inquires as he adjusts research papers into his briefcase. Egon looks off to the side, sucking air between his teeth, as he said, I tried, once. It didn't work and now they live here full time. Why's that? Morgana asks. Egon sighs, like bringing up an exhausting memory, and explains in short, house guests are like fish. They stink after 3 days. And when they came to stay with me, they'd already ripened 2 days prior. Is it also because Otto smells like fish? Doctrine adds with a cackle as she finishes off her first bottle of booze of the night. Egon wiggles his hand in a SOSO manner, placing Pete on his head, and explains, with aggravation, that's just a small part. But also Cluck got me up at the ass. Crack of dawn for food, and Otto kept bugging me for mental stimulation. Before anything else could happen, a strange person in a hoodie came out of nowhere and practically threw themselves in front of the entryway steps, scraping everyone half to death as they scream, "Help me!" Everyone jumps at their sudden arrival and gets ready for a fight or to run. One of them was Pete, who, after falling off Egon's head, ran up to the person, jumped on their head, and began mercifully pecking them, to which the person ignored and continued yelling in a desperate plea, please help me." "What the? Who are you? What's wrong?" Izuku asks after realizing they were in no danger. But the person still didn't explain anything as he continued to beg as Pete mercilessly attacked him. "Please help me. Hide me. Before they find me." "Before who finds you?" Izuku asks as he moves back, seeing the person crawling toward them. Egon places a hand on his shoulder and tells him with his staff, "We'll ask questions later. I'll open the door, you help him inside, and Morgana you call the heroes dash dot." But before he could finish, the person suddenly shrieks, "No, don't call them. They are working with them." "The heroes?" Izuku asks back, trying to draw the lines. "Yes," he exclaimed as Pete still attacked him. A little while later, the mystery person, now known as a man, was helped into the building by the scientists. After getting him inside one of the division wings, they closed down the building again, making it look closed from the outside as they stayed in the deeper parts of the building where no light could be seen from within. Once they had the man settled, they woke up Otto and Cluck from their downtime and got back to work trying to figure out this person and what had gotten him in such a frenzy, especially over refusing help from the heroes or law enforcement. They even had to put Pete in another room to keep from continuing to attack him. The man in question was about 30 or so, tall and so incredibly thin, bald head, green eyes, and black skin with his skeleton that seems to either bleed through or was painted upon his skin. He sorta looked like a well-made skeleton costume. He somehow looked tired and out of his wits at the same time. The man was sitting in a testing chamber, in front of a table where he was drinking glass after glass of water as Izuku and Egon stood behind the one-way glass and observed him. Izuku was looking over something on a Pura pad, made by its namesake, when Egon asked him, "So what you got on him?" Flipping through the information he just managed to gather, he answered, "His name is Viktor Petrov. He's from Russia and is wanted in several parts of the world." This surprised him and sent Egon on edge, thinking they had just aided a known criminal or terrorist. But taking it in stride, he continued with suspicion in his tone. "Wanted for what?" "It doesn't say." "I mean, it does say, but I'm pretty sure they are fabrications," Izuku told him with an unsure tone as he handed the pad over to him. Taking the pad and adjusting his glasses, he looks over the info on the man and is shocked by what he sees, exclaiming in disbelief, "Geez, you're right, seen by the untrained eye, these are fabricated. Why in the world are several countries across the globe trying to get this one guy?" Before Izuku could their eyes on this, Otto comes in and answers, "It's his quirk." The octopus handed him a clipboard of information printed off about the man's biology. Egon sighs and tells him, "Thanks again for helping us despite it being your time off, Otto." Otto waves him off and assures him, "It's all part of the job. Anyway, I ran a sample of his DNA and I managed to decode what his quirk can do. And," Izuku prompts him, "I've personally dubbed it as resurrection," he tells them as they both look over the sheet of paper with all the current information they had on Victor's quirk. If he touches something after it has long since died, he can bring it back to life no matter what state it's in, Otto explains, making the two men look on in shock with every word they heard and read to themselves. He could touch a piece of hair and bring back a whole woolly mammoth from it. But we don't need to do that, do we? Otto jokes. Egon rolls his eyes and snorts in amusement as he replies, "We don't. But wow, that's quite a power. It's no wonder he's being hunted like an animal. If anyone in the world managed to get their hands on that, they'd be unstoppable." Izuku nods and the two men decide to confront the man to get the whole truth and why he was even here. So they entered the testing chamber where the man just fished off a second picture of water. Sitting across from him, Izuku starts by asking in a kind tone, "Hey Victor, how are you feeling?" "Better," he admits while breathing deeply. "You don't have to worry. You're safe," Izuku assures him. "Thank you again for helping me," Victor graciously tells them. We, kind of figured some stuff about you, Egon admitted. Victor shoots them both a look and inquires, let me guess, my background or my quirk? Egon put his hands together and answered, yes to both. We understand your situation, but we don't know why you came to us for help. Victor looks off to the side, a sign that they were in for an origin story, and the man tells them, ever since I was young, my mother told me I was special. Though, I didn't know how much she truly meant it. He started but could see in the men's eyes that they were already getting tired of hearing it, or just tired. So Vita sighs, and tells them, I'll spare you the details, but one day a friend of mine was killed in an accident, and well, I brought her back. From then on I was hunted down no matter where I went. I got to a point when I tried to kill myself. Both men become extremely uncomfortable by this, especially Izuku from his previous experience with this. But seeing that the man was very much alive and that Izuku was too uncomfortable to ask, Egon inquired carefully, I'm guessing your quirk works just as much on you as it does on others. Precisely, Victor told him with a dry and crazed chuckle. Then I heard about your facility and I came here as fast as I could so I could ask, no, so I could beg you, please, help me. He suddenly threw himself across the table and grabbed at the two scientist lab coats. Pulling the hopelessly desperate man off and seating him back down, Izuku asked him in a horrified tone, what do you want us to do? Try and kill you? I want you to take away my quirk, he answered quickly. Take away your what? The two scientists ask before looking at one another. He gets down on his hands and knees before them and pleads, please. I know how amazing you all are. You're smart and have some kind of ace up your sleeves, getting you this far after such a short time. So, please, do anything to rid myself of this nightmare, he begs as tears fall from his face. The two scientists quickly excuse themselves from the room and once on the other side of the door, Izuku asks in stress, Egon, what'll we do? No one's ever attempted to extract a quirk from a person. I'm not even sure such a thing is possible. Science is already determined. It's no different from my color and height. Egon opens his mouth to agree, but stops and thinks for a bit before replying. I wouldn't think so. The Nomu had multiple quirks, so it is possible. But we have no idea how to do that, Izuku argues back. Egon puts in a thinking expression as he takes his brain from an idea. He sees the hallway sign that leads to the Singularity Soul and smiles as he tells his ward. Maybe not, but we have to try. Egon then pulls out his phone and it picks up quite quickly as he says to the other end, Hatsune, I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but we need your help. The man says something on the other end and Egon tells him, I'll spare you the nitty-gritty, but in short, we need to extract a quirk from a living person. Suddenly the line goes dead and Egon calls out loud, hello. Say no more, I'm on the case, Hatsune suddenly exclaims after appearing from nowhere, making the two men jump in fright so bad they nearly wet themselves. Frantically looking around and at the one-eyed man, Egon sputters out before realizing, how did you stole the super speed splinter, didn't you? Hatsune just sticks out his tongue while putting his hand on his head, trying to act coy. But Egon just sighs exhausted while rolling up his sleeves and telling him, we'll talk about this later. Let's get to work. The hours of the night went by quickly as all the scientists still at the facility worked as hard as they could plan, design, and make a machine capable of performing an unnatural feat of nature and science. Hatsune was in his element and was buzzing around as he made this contraption. Egon couldn't tell if it was the caffeine or the super speed splinter he had forgotten to take from him. It also helped a lot that they had an army of robots to do the work of 100 men and a few splinters that helped with aiding in brain function and construction, including a strange splinter that allowed someone to construct anything like it is made of Legos, so long as they knew how to put it together. Things were going well, too. Well, and that foreboding feeling manifested in a message from Morgana. Sir, there's a small militia out by the front of the building, she said over the speakers. Egon quickly took out his own Pura pad and brought up the security cams from the outside where, as the woman said, there was a small militia from what seemed to be another country standing outside his front entryway. So he stopped what he was doing and cleaned himself off before going to meet with the army. Once he got to the front, he took a deep breath and unlocked it. Stepping outside before the army and their tanks, he asked as innocently as he could, Can I help you boys with something? We're looking for a man by the name of Victor Petrov. He looks like a skeleton, and is a wanted fugitive in several countries. The frontman, no doubt the leader, told him in a thick accent. Egon placed a finger to his chin and shaking his head told the man, "Sorry, I haven't seen anyone like that." But before he could turn around to leave, the man yelled, "Don't lie." "Who's lying?" Egon asks back while keeping calm. "We know," he insisted. "Know what?" Egon insisted back. The man then took his own iPad device and turned it around to show aerial footage of Victor racing towards the facility and being brought inside as the leader stated. "We know." Thinking face, Egon put up his hands while acting calm and admitted, All right, you got me. I'll bring him out, so no need to get violent." But the leader wasn't having it as he approached the front steps as he tried to force. "No, we will come in and dash dot." But he didn't even get a chance to finish as every security measure at the front of the facility suddenly sprang to life and pointed their laser-guided lights at the leader and all the soldiers present. The leader froze in his tracks upon seeing this, and slowly backed away, but the laser lights did not go away. Upon seeing the smug expression of Egon, he gulped while grimacing and the scientist repeated, "I said, I'll bring him out. So let's not get violent, yes." Taking a deep breath, the leader agreed, "Yes." Once he was back inside the building, he stood over in one of the darker parts and leaned against a wall while letting out a stressed breath from fear. After calming down, he looked over to his side, seeing nothing at first, but continued to stare until Izuku suddenly appeared out of the air thanks to the invisibility splinter. Izuku just smiled awkwardly at him, and Egon just rubbed his head as he thought. After thinking over their predicament, he told Izuku, "Get the dragon." Izuku nods and vanishes again. After a few minutes of what seemed to be a stalemate between the foreign troops and the NIP security system, Egon makes his reappearance once stands boldly before the aggravated troops and proclaims, "Sorry to keep you boys waiting, but here he is," he stated while motioning off to the side of the building. When the soldiers do, instead of seeing their quarry being brought out to them from a different part of the building, they see something that locks them in place. With fear, between the darkness of the night, the city lights casting a vague casting, alongside the red glow of the laser-gilded weapons, they saw the shape of a huge creature with eyes that burned like hellfire and bore into their souls. Without a single warning, the hideous shape breathed deeply and exhaled a stream of flames, so massive and hot that none of them had the chance to scream before they were all engulfed. When the fires settled from Torchwick's charred mouth, the only thing left of the invaders was nothing but a pool of molten blood, bone, and molten metal from the tanks. Nothing remained of them. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Izuku pets the now elephant-sized dragon, telling him good job and bringing him back to his enclosure. Egon sighs with relief at seeing their potential problem taken care of while saying, "To the puddle, you get what you deserve. Bitches." After spitting at the molten pool of death, Egon presses a comlink on his ear and says, "Send some cleaning bots to scrape up the mess out in the front." Almost immediately, a whale squad of bots come out of nowhere and begin to clean and dispose of the evidence. By morning, it'll be like nothing even happened. Egon walks back into the building and back to the division wing where Victor was hooked up to the machine that would hopefully extract his quirk. It is so large and concluded that much of its inner workings went over Egon's head. He just hoped this monster would work. As he approached the hooked-up skeleton man, he asked him, "Professor, what was all that noise?" Egon waves it off while a kind smile and tells him, "Oh, nothing you need to worry about." But on a more serious note, "Listen, Victor, what we're about to do is completely experimental, highly dangerous, and comes with a high chance of you dying. We've never done something like this before and have practically thrown this machine together in the last few hours. No tests have been made even with all the synthesized scenarios for the outcomes. There is also a huge chance of this not working at all or killing you. Are you sure you want to go through this?" Victor closes his eyes, nods, and affirms, "I'm sure. Even if my quirk was taken and I survived, I wouldn't have a life to go back to." He then looks down at the huge machine with metal parts and strange tubes connected along its body and hooked up to several parts of his own as he asks, "Just explain how it works." Izuku, who just came back from putting up Torchwick for the night, explains to him, "We found these things called quirk centers, and they are basically what everyone has in determining where their quirk manifests the most. We'll hook up to those spots and use a machine that has a reversed polarity charge to bring it out. The site of this will be used from the large crystal structure you see on the other end. The crystal will be used to suck up and store away your quirk. Could you dumb that down? Victor asks him, his brain already short-circuiting. We're going suck your quirk from special unseen holes in your body using the power of that huge crystal to remove and store it away, Izuku says in more simplified terms. That makes more sense. Victor finally relents with acknowledgement. Then it was Dr. Orpington who came up in her mechanical device and reading. Off a clipboard she announced to him, there's a 5% chance of full success with no death, a 27% chance of it working with you dying, a 67% chance of it not working and you just die, a 30% chance of this not working and you survive, and a 59% chance of this machine exploding and dash. Okay, we get it. Wiley yells at her, seeing how uncomfortable she was, making everyone with her analysis. Doctrine then took up the front and told Victor in no uncertain terms, her voice very regretful and somewhat nervous as she doused her mood in more booze. Listen, kid, I won't lie. I've crunched the numbers and this will hurt like hell. I've made a sedative geared towards your specific bodily functions and we'll sedate you with it, but I can't promise anything after that. I told you to do it anyway, Victor told her, and the rest of the staff with no hesitation. Doctrine shrugs after taking a long sip from her bottle and relents, so be it. As Egon goes to the controls for the machine, punching it all he needs to show the greatest leg of success, as Chopper and Doctrine prepped Victor for the procedure. Wiley came up to his side with Izuku and inquired, Professor Egon, are you sure about this? You're using the thing that started and is keeping this place afloat. Egon stopped thinking up his mile-a-minute calculations and typing as he leaned down his head and sighed deeply, after which he told the short old man, it's for a special cause. Besides, we're not copying a quirk, we're taking one out. We'll need everything we can use to pull this off. Besides, we've already established that there's more and we know where to look. Both he and Izuku did not look fully convinced, so he rolled his eyes at their twin concerns and assured them, I've already got Pura and Robbie working on setting up an expedition to dig up more. The two of them already knew how passionate and on par their new co-workers were. They had only been here a short time and had managed to simultaneously turn the place upside down while making huge leaps in research. They just left yesterday for their trip, but knowing them they'd probably send back several veins of the Singularity Soul and an alien to boot. Izuku was the first to relent as he said, I guess you're right. This is what a hero would do. Goodbye, Singularity Soul. Thanks for everything so far. Wiley was not so pleased but had no room to argue, so he just sat there and stewed in his frustration. On the other hand, he'd have his name on the title of being one of the first people to extract a genetic trait, so that brightened up his mood ever so slightly. After typing in the last bit of numbers into the machine, Egon placed on goggles and announced, Begin. The machine burst to life and the Singularity Soul also began to glow an even brighter white to the point it became the spotlight. Things seemed to be going well. At first, with red energy being pooler out from the tubes attached all over Victor, and slowly being drawn into the Singularity Soul. The scene attached to the machine showed the progress going from 5 to 30% in a slow yet concise manner. Then things started to go wrong once it was 40%. The machine began to whirl buzz and expel excess heat far faster than it did before, to the point of the sound started to become overwhelming. Victor, who had been holding up well so far, spat out the mouthguard he was biting down on as he started to scream in pain. Fear and anxiety gripped the scientist and some wanted to stop the procedure, but Egon refused, not knowing what would happen if they stopped midway through and the potential consequences it may hold. So they continued as the machine ran faster and Victor screamed louder and louder. Soon the machine began to fizzle and buzz and short-circuit wildly and dangerously, but Egon yelled for them to keep going. The machine was only at 70%, and every moment was like hell. Suddenly the machine began to burst and catch fire. The scientist rushed to keep it under control and Egon wanted to stop it once things caught aflame, but it was Victor who swayed him and yelled to keep going. So reluctantly he agreed. and the process finally hit 90% as the singularity soul began to die down and change color. Victor kept screaming as blood began to pool out from all his orifices. Finally, it hit 100% and the machine stopped as fireboys came in to put out the flaming machine as the kickback of energy nearly knocked the facility's power out. Turning the emergency stop on, Egon jumped from behind the controls and yelled, "Victor! Victor! Get him out of there!" Izuku and Doctrine spring into action as they ripped the man away from all his hookups and placed him on the ground where Chopper got to work checking his vitals. As the staff surrounded the man's smoking and bloody body, the machine was burning faster and faster as the fire bite worked to put it out. After a few horrible seconds, Izuku asks, "How is he?" Chopper pulls away from him and says, "He's alive, but barely." At that moment, Victor stirred and weakly called out, "P. Professor. D. Doctor." "Yes, we're all here," Izuku told him, taking his hand to reassure him. He breathed heavily and ragged as he barely mumbled out in a whisper, Did it work?" Izuku sniffles back tears and confirms, Yes, it did. Your quirk is gone." Egon waved his hand and Wily brought over a hand mirror that Izuku held up to his face. Victor could barely open his eyes, but when he did, he saw himself without black skin and a skeleton that bled through his body. Now he saw a normal Russian man, with fine skin and blue eyes. A smile crept onto his face as he barely managed to say, "So, this is how I look, I'm glad." With that last word, Victor took his last breath, closed his eyes, and left this world, a smile still on his peaceful face. The scientist gathered around the man and parted, with his passing in silence, shedding tears as they did so. "He's gone," Chopper said with a tone of disbelief. "Oh, Victor. I hope you found peace." Izuku sniffles. I hate to break up a mournful moment like this, but what are we supposed to do with the singularity soul that now houses the resurrection quirk?" Hatsum put forth. They all looked at the singularity soul and saw how it drastically changed. Instead of glowing white, it glowed as dark black with white parts that almost looked like it had Jones showing through. But there were no bones ever seen on any living creatures, just a strange assortment of shapes and lengths. It looked like Victor before his quirk was taken, and it dawned on them. The procedure may have killed him, but it worked in storing his quirk. Without a moment of hesitation, Egon walked up to the singularity soul, picked it up over his head, and threw it down with all his might, smashing it to bits and causing a group gasp from everyone else. Turning around with a ragged expression and breathing heavily, a serious look on his face, he told them in no uncertain terms, "I want all the fragments collected and destroyed. This quirk doesn't exist in any records around the world and it will stay that way. No one is to speak of what has happened tonight. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they all said in unison. Calming down after this, he said to the staff in an exhausted voice, "Good. Then, clean up the mess and go home. You all deserve a good rest. I'll cremate Victor's body." Just as the cleaning bot came in to collect the mess and Egon went to put Victor's body on a stretcher, Izuku spoke up and offered, "Can't we just bring him back?" Egon turned to him, a somber expression on his face as he asked back, "Do you think he'd want that?" Izuku looked down at the peaceful face of the dead man, a single tear running down his face as he answered back, "Yeah, that was a stupid question." As the body was covered and sent off to the blast furnace, Morgan came up and said, Sir, if I could make a suggestion." Egon have her his attention and the woman offered, "Do you think we should erect a statue in honor of him? For his sacrifice to science?" Everyone perked up at that idea and with a sad smile on his face, Izuku chimed in and stated, "That's a wonderful idea. We'll do that soon. First, let's get the ever-growing dragon out of here before he outgrows the whole facility." The other staff laughed a bit at the joke, and this ended a tragic and monumental day for Laboratory, a day that would never be spoken of or only be known again decades later.